those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Tuesday, the 12th of December. Coming up.
Rwanda reckoning. Any moment now, Home Secretary James Cleverly will take to his feet in the House of Commons in his final plea to MPs to back the Safety of Rwanda bill. But will he be able to persuade enough MPs ahead of the crucial vote this evening?
Migrant dies on Bibby Stockholm barge. Earlier reports from the CEO of the charity Care for Calais have suggested the asylum seeker took his own life on board. We'll bring you more detail as we get it.
And bankrupt Birmingham. The people of Birmingham have been threatened with a huge council tax rise and reduced services in the new year. Is your council at risk of bankruptcy?
Now, we're just moments away from the official final debate on the Rwanda bill to take place in the House of Commons. Home Secretary James Cleverly will be trying to convince MPs, both who are sceptical of the bill for going too far and sceptical of the bill for not going far enough, that actually it's the right course to take.
I imagine there are quite a few Conservative MPs who are still unsure which way they're going to vote.
And it does seem that the government is pulling out all the stops. A breakfast for MPs in number 10 this morning from the new Conservative group.
On that, yesterday we were talking about how it might be smoked salmon that they were served. Apparently...
Not smoked salmon.
Not smoked salmon. Bacon rolls. A little more down to earth.
A better breakfast. But, of course, all of this is, of course, in a new context. In the last 30 minutes or so, we've learnt some pretty terrible news from aboard the Bibby Stockholm. How will that cloud the debate today?
Yes, it might well do.
And does it mean that people are going to be more likely or less likely to back the bill? Obviously, having fewer asylum seekers living in any sort of temporary accommodation has got to be a priority. But
it really is crunch time, so we'll bring you the very latest, and we'll be speaking to a number of Conservative MPs and experts on the show today. But first, let's get the headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The Home Office has confirmed an asylum seeker on board the Bibby Stockholm barge has died. The first asylum seekers were brought back to the vessel, docked in Dorset in October, around 2 months after it was evacuated following the discovery of Legionella bacteria in the water supply. According to media reports, police and ambulance services arrived at the scene after the body was found this morning. Rishi Sunak tells MPs he will listen to suggestions for tightening the safety of the Rwanda bill, but he will not commit to amendments. Rishi Sunak's fighting for his political future as he attempts to persuade a group of rebel Tory MPs to back the legislation ahead of a key vote. Right-wing Conservatives will meet this evening to make a final decision on whether to vote against the safety of the Rwanda bill or to abstain. While some Tory MPs have given their support for the vote, they've warned against any attempts to harden the measures. The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accused the Tory party of being too self-involved to govern, adding that he thinks the legislation would pass at a second reading later.
We're all stuck in their psychodrama, all being dragged down to their level. And that's what they just don't understand. While they're swanning around self-importantly, with their factions and their star chambers, fighting like rats in a sack, there's a country out here that isn't being governed. A country that needs leadership.
Child killer Lucy Letby does not object to being stripped of her nursing credentials, the court has heard. The two-day hearing will decide if Letby should be removed from the register. Letby filled out a form where she was asked if she accepts the Nursing and Midwifery Council's charges. She said, "I accept the fact of the convictions and I maintain my innocence in respect of all of the convictions." In August, the 33-year-old was sentenced to 14 whole life orders after she was convicted of the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murders of 6 others. 3 men have died and 2 others suffered life-threatening injuries after a collision between a bus and a car. The incident happened at 7 p.m. last night in Coedili in Wales. 2 young men aged 18 and 1 aged 19 were declared dead at the scene. The pace of wage growth has eased back by more than expected, whilst UK unemployment remains unchanged. The Office for National Statistics says wages rose by 7.3% in the 3 months to October, which is down from 7.8% in the previous 3 months. This was the steepest fall in earnings growth since the 3 months to November 2021. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt said it's positive to see inflation continue to fall and real wages growing. Some good news for renters as price increases are expected to halve by the end of next year. Rents have increased by nearly 10% over the past year, leaving potential tenants stranded in the cost of living crisis. But there are signs the UK is now past peak growth. Property website Zoopla expects annual rental growth to drop to 5% by December next year. Plans to relocate more than 20,000 civil service jobs outside of London will be brought forward to 2027. The target to move the roles away from the capital by 2030 has been accelerated, with plans also to open second headquarters for several departments in Aberdeen, Darlington and Greater Manchester. More than 300 jobs will also be located in Wales, as ministers say it was a sign of the government's commitment to levelling up. The government says the decision will deliver economic benefits to regions across the country. And 11 to 16-year-old pupils are being failed by the education system. That's according to the Lords Committee. A House of Lords report is calling for the English Bachelorette to be axed. It warns the education system's too focused on academic learning and written exams, and reform is urgently needed. It also says the current system is limiting pupils' opportunities to study abroad. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. The Prime Minister is trying to avert a damaging rebellion by right-wing Tory MPs over his Rwanda plan. This is ahead of tonight's crunch vote.
Both the flagship scheme and arguably Sunak's premiership depend on the outcome of tonight's key vote.
And Sir Keir Starmer has accused the Tories of being in an indulgent vortex of infighting.
Yes, but he's also said that he does think that this bill will go through because of the government's majority, but we shall see.
Yes, well, let's speak now to our political editor, Christopher Hope. He's in Westminster with the chairman of the Conservative Party, Richard Holden. Chris.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, Emily. With me now is Richard Holden, the chairman of the Tory party. Richard Holden, 4 years ago today, you were elected as a Red Wall Tory MP against the odds. What's gone wrong with the party?
Look, I think today we've got a really important thing to do, and that's to deliver the toughest possible legislation imaginable, tougher than anything any government's previously passed, to really help clamp down on illegal immigration and get that Rwanda scheme moving as quickly as possible. It removes all of those legal issues that have dogged us over the years when we've tried to ensure that people get deported from the UK. So I think this is a really strong plan. I hope that people get behind it. It's absolutely vital that they do, because the only other alternative is Keir Starmer's open-door immigration policy. Keir Starmer thinks that any form of controls on immigration are racist, which is obvious nonsense, and we need to have a strong plan and back the Prime Minister tonight in order to deliver for the British people.
But your colleagues think that they can't back it. The 5 families of the Tory right are meeting at 5 o'clock today. They may well vote against it. What's your message to them?
I would just say this is the toughest possible package that has been brought forwards. Obviously, this is also a second reading vote today, so this is on the principle of it. Any Tory MP should be backing the principle of tougher immigration controls, which is exactly what's on the table today. There's obviously further detail, and as the government's made clear, if there's any tweaks that can be made to toughen it up further, then they're open to discussions on that. But we've got to be there really strong on the principle of tougher rules. And I think to my colleagues, I would just say to this, the other option is a Labour government who want open-door immigration. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see those controls that we've fought hard to put in place over the last few years removed. I want to see us making further progress and really clamping down. We've already seen boat arrivals down by a third this year. We've seen hundreds of criminals arrested here in the UK, really taking this head on. We've got to go further and we've got to take action now.
You mentioned our Labour government. Are you saying that if the government loses tonight, there'll be an election in the early spring?
What I'm saying tonight is I think any weakness from our party today will not help the cause, which is so important to voters up and down the country, including in constituencies like mine, including in marginal seats like Bury, right across the country. We've got to ensure that we are as tough as practically possible on these measures. That's what this bill does. That's what Lord Wolfson has said. That's what Lord Sumption has said, former Supreme Court Justice. We need to be there for the British people, delivering for them.
How confident are you of winning tonight? Will it be a tight vote?
Look, I just hope that all colleagues really think seriously about this. This is a second reading of a bill to have the toughest immigration controls this country has ever seen. Right? That's what's on the table tonight. Anybody who isn't backing that has got to really have a good look in the mirror today. I want to see everybody supporting this. Everybody supporting the Prime Minister, who's bringing forward the toughest possible legislation in this space.
And MPs who vote against will lose the whip?
Look, whipping matters are a matter for the Chief Whip. I'm there to help support colleagues up and down the country and deliver as many Conservative MPs as possible at the next general election. Voting for this measure tonight will help me do that. I want all colleagues to be with us in the division lobbies wherever possible, because this is such an important piece of legislation, especially when you contrast it to Keir Starmer's speech today. You know, won't even mention the £28 billion a year he's planning to borrow. Right? He's trying to hide from those issues. That would be an extra 5% on the basic rate of income tax for people, right? We need to be very clear. There is a real clear dividing line here. A Conservative Party that is committed to delivering for the British people on controlling illegal immigration. A Labour Party that wants open borders and tax hikes right across the board for the people of our country.
And just very finally, Richard Holden, odds on winning tonight, 50-50?
Look, I'm going to be out there doing as much as I can to convince colleagues that this is exactly the right thing to do. We need to be as hard as possible on immigration, because the other option is an open door, not just to unlimited migration, but to the Labour Party who would wreck our country.
Richard Holden, thank you for joining us on GB News. Yeah, and you heard there, Tom Lemley, Richard Holden, the chairman of the Tory party, making clear they will look at amending it maybe in the spring just to get past tonight's vote. A key moment, almost existential, on the 4-year anniversary of that Tory landslide back in 2019. Back to you.
Well, Chris, what a poignant moment to end on then. 4 years ago today, when it looked so different, when the polls were so different, when the political makeup of the country felt so different. Christopher Hope there in Westminster.
Yes, absolutely. Strong stuff from Richard Holden there, the chairman of the Conservative Party, insisting that every single Conservative MP must back the government when it comes to this
bill. Of course,
but will they?
He was framing it in electoral terms as well. I suppose that's the frame through which he views these things as chairman of the party, as the man responsible for the election campaign likely next year. But it is interesting that he started to bring forward this idea that if Tory MPs vote against it, they are likely to lose seats at the next election, which I suppose makes sense on the one hand in that disunited parties don't win elections. But on the other hand, if this bill passes and then fails in a way, perhaps it doesn't stop the votes in the way that things have been promised, then that's also an electoral issue.
Well, this is the conundrum for the Conservative Party, isn't it? Because the infighting and the different groups meeting and deciding what they think about this flagship bill doesn't look good to the electorate. But then if the bill doesn't actually work, and if there are these loopholes that the Star Chamber, which is those lawyers that are working on behalf of these right-wing groups of the Tory party, if they're right and it doesn't work and it isn't the toughest immigration rules we've ever seen, then, you know, that's also could cost votes.
Well, both these things could be true. It could be true that it is both the toughest rules that we have ever seen, but there are still some loopholes. The word was incomplete that the Star Chamber referred to. Now, I suppose the big question is, can those quote-unquote loopholes be tightened up at committee stage in the spring, Or is it just fundamentally a problem with the absolute basis of this bill as it is written? Those are big questions, but it did seem that Richard Holden, talking to Christopher Hope there, was saying that actually the government is open to listening to what can be done at committee stage to perhaps tighten it up even further.
Well, that's interesting because, yes, this bill is not necessarily a finished product,
no,
and MPs will have the opportunity to try and amend it as it goes through all those different stages through the Commons, and then, of course, it goes to the Lords, and then we shall see if it passes and then what legal challenges come about after that. It's a long process to get legislation through Parliament.
Yes, as I think it should be. It's a weighty thing to legislate on behalf of people of a country. And it's one of the reasons, actually, I visited the Hungarian Parliament not that long ago. And they have, like the European Parliament, they have little buttons for MPs to vote. They press little buttons on their desks. And I think that this makes bad law. I think when legislators don't have to... In the UK, we have to physically walk through a voting lobby. You have to vote with your feet. You have to be present there, and it takes time. You're not just pressing a little button on a desk.
Also, it's a good thing because it encourages our politicians not to work from home. They must come in. They must come into Westminster.
But I think that sense of this sort of weightiness on your shoulders, of especially if you're raising a tax or restricting a liberty or doing something profound that governments do, law is profound, and it should be a weighty process.
What did you make of Richard Holden's, what he was saying there? Did he sound to you passionate or a little bit desperate and concerned?
I picked up on that.
There was a little bit of both, wasn't there? He was definitely impassioned. He had an impassioned plea to his colleagues to vote with the government, but he also sounded a little bit like maybe he's a tad worried.
Well, he was speaking quite quickly, wasn't he? And sometimes that can just be through absolute passion. But yes, perhaps I don't want to raise the P word, panic, but perhaps I mean, I suppose when you get to a crunch vote, and this evening, I don't think we can emphasise this enough, is such a crunch vote for the government. The next 7 or so hours of debate are crucial, really, really crucial. And we'll be going live to the Commons when the Home Secretary stands up on his feet as well. That'll be it's been delayed in the House of Commons. It's going to start at 12:40, so in less than half an hour's time. But it is fascinating as well. We heard Richard Holden bring up these new attack lines against the Labour Party. Of course, he's running the election campaign for the Conservative Party, and he will be bringing out these lines again, this £28 billion of borrowing, which he has, for the first time I've heard this, equated to a 5% rise on the basic rate of income tax. Now, that's not Labour policy, and the Labour Party would say, you're inventing this stuff. But the Tories would say, well, if you're going to borrow £28 billion, you're going to have to pay for it somehow. And one of the ways you could pay for it is raising income tax, the basic rate, by 5%.
And if you're just joining us now, I think we will try and replay some of that interview because it was very interesting indeed to hear from the chairman of the Conservative Party ahead of this vote, trying desperately to convince his colleagues who are thinking about not voting with the government to do so instead, because it doesn't take that many MPs, does it, to vote against this bill for it to collapse this second reading.
You need 28 Tories to vote against the bill or 56 to abstain.
Well, an asylum seeker has died on Bibby Stockholm Barge that's docked in Portland, Dorset. The Home Office has said an ongoing investigation into the incident is underway.
Well, this was the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer's reaction to hearing the news just a short while ago.
Second point, I'm afraid I just simply haven't seen this breaking news, so I don't know the details of it, but obviously, first and foremost, my heart goes out to the family and friends of an individual who may have or has lost their life. I don't know the circumstances, so I'll try and give a fuller answer when I do, but my human instinct is, of course, to with the individual who's lost his or her life and the family and friends of that individual who will be absolutely grieving.
Yes, that was Keir Starmer being put on the spot, really, with the breaking news that someone has died aboard the Bibby Stockholm barge, which, of course, the barge itself has been hugely controversial and many problems on the barge, not least the Legionella outbreak not too long ago. I believe we have Ray Addison, who joins us now. Thank you very much, Ray. What do we know about what happened to this asylum seeker aboard the barge?
Well, details are starting to emerge very, very slowly. We know that the body of an asylum seeker was discovered this morning by residents of the Bibby Stockholm barge in Portland in Dorset. An ambulance and police responded to that discovery and have been taking underway there on the scene. Of course, the person's age and the country of origin are not yet known, and further details of the incident and how they died are yet to be confirmed. You mentioned there the Home Office. They've responded saying that they are aware of reporting of the incident involving an asylum seeker, but as it's an ongoing police investigation, it would be inappropriate to comment further at this time. Charities have been responding, however. Freedom from Torture says, until this government stops forcing refugees into unsafe and undignified accommodation, we'll continue to see horrific stories of deaths, suicide attempts, serious health issues and unnecessary suffering. Care for Calais is saying that the UK government has willfully ignored the trauma that is caused by inflicting people who are sent to, that they are inflicting on people who are sent to the Bibby Stockholm, and that they have been regularly reporting suicidal intention among residents. Now, at this stage, we don't know how that asylum seeker, the person on the barge, died. However, those two charities there seeming to imply that suicide may have been involved. Of course, we cannot confirm that at this stage. In the past, of course, former Home Secretary Suella Braverman had insisted that the Bibby Stockholm barge was safe. That's despite it being beset by problems. Of course, it was initially designed only to house 200 people. That was modified to 500, causing a lot of concern from the Fire Brigades Union. They were saying that it was a potential death trap. They said that access to fire exits and there was possible overcrowding. As of last November, it was reported that there was around the issue at this stage. However, we do know that lead migrants finally moved back in October, and now, of course, with this news, it throws up a lot more questions about the safety and the conditions of those living on board the Bibby Stockholm.
And Ray, just very quickly, of course, some people have been referring to this as a prison vessel. Of course, that's not the case. These asylum seekers are able to come and go. It's just a form of accommodation that they're staying in.
Certainly it's accommodation. I think it's important to recognise it was designed for 200 people initially. And that was increased dramatically, although, of course, those currently on the barge was way below that 200 threshold, which was initially intended. Asylum seekers who are on board the barge are certainly allowed to come and go. There are also facilities on board the barge for them as well, leisure facilities too, and there was various community groups as well, certainly making efforts to help those that are housed on the barge feel part of that community, even going so far as to issue them with welcome packs and providing help hotlines for them to call as well.
Ray, please bring us more as you get it. But coming up, killer nurse Lucy Letby could be stripped of her nursing status following her horrific crimes. Well, you'd assume as much, would you not?
You would. That, and also, of course, the debate in Parliament on Rwanda kicking off in the next 20 or so minutes. We'll have all the latest after this.
We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United
Is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. The killer nurse, Lucy Letby, could be stripped of her nursing status following her horrific crimes.
A two-day hearing of the Nursing and Midwifery Council starts today, and a panel could decide to permanently strike the 33-year-old off the register and remove her nursing credentials. Letby does not oppose a bid to strike her from the nursing register, but maintains her innocence in respect of her convictions. Sophie Reaper has more.
The most prolific serial killer of children in modern British history. 4 months ago, Lucy Letby was found guilty of 7 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. Whilst she was working on the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital, she carried out her killing spree. A jury at Manchester Crown Court spent 10 months hearing about the case, including details of how Letby carried out her attacks and seeing evidence which ultimately led to 14 guilty verdicts. In recognition of this, Justice Goss sentenced the former nurse to a whole life order, meaning she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. But the end of the trial did not mean the end of the story.
I will do all I can to make sure that no one else suffers as they have.
A statutory inquiry as well as a corporate manslaughter investigation into the Countess of Chester are now underway. In September, Letby's legal team also launched an application to make an appeal against her convictions, not to mention Cheshire Constabulary's continued investigation into further potential incidents.
We've got a duty to the people of Cheshire and beyond to make sure that we investigate every single admission into the neonatal unit during the period of time that Lucy Letby's been employed, either at the Countess of Chester Hospital or the Liverpool Women's Hospital, to make sure that we can identify any other potential allegations or potential offences that may have been committed by her.
Today, a two-day hearing will take place, led by the Nursing and Midwifery Council, to determine whether or not Lucy Letby should be stripped of her nursing credentials. Commenting at the time of the guilty verdicts, the NMC Chief Executive, Andrea Sutcliffe, said, "This has been a long, complex criminal investigation. We've kept in close contact with the police and the Trust throughout, and will continue to do so. Ms Letby remains suspended from our register, and we will now move forward with our regulatory action, seeking to strike her off the register." For Letby, if this goes ahead, regardless of the outcome of appeals and further investigations, she would no longer be considered a nurse. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Now, this is quite incredible, isn't it, Tom? Because this is a woman who's been sentenced to a whole life order in prison for murdering 7 babies, I believe it was, and the attempted murder of further babies. You would have thought that this would just be automatic, that she would no longer be on this nursing registry.
I mean, it's understandable if someone's charged but not convicted that they'd still be on the register. But if they're convicted, if a court of law has found them guilty of what they have done, even if they still maintain their innocence, the court has found them guilty. Surely that should have automatic repercussions. But I suppose what the other argument to that is, does it matter if she's in prison? She's never going to work as a nurse again. She's serving under a whole life order. This sort of administrative change isn't a real world effect.
Well, no, it's not. But I find it remarkable that they're going through this rather long process in order to strip her of her qualifications. Very odd indeed, but we'll find out. That was very interesting from Sophie Reaper there.
And I suppose it is important for the I suppose, closure for families.
Maybe,
and symbolically, I suppose, doing this move, even though it's not a sort of real-world thing, it's not that this decision would put more people at risk or otherwise. It's about whether this person should have a recognition of status.
But you would have thought that being a nurse who convicted of killing 7 babies, that would rule out your nursing qualifications. But there you go, let us know what you think. GBviews at gbnews.com.
Well, in other news, campaigners are bringing a new legal battle against a decision to approve a controversial road project, which includes a tunnel near the prehistoric monument of Stonehenge. We'll have much more on that after your headlines with Tatiana.
Tom, thank you. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Home Office has confirmed an asylum seeker on board the Bibby Stockholm barge has died. The first asylum seekers were brought back to the vessel, docked in Dorset in October, around 2 months after it was evacuated following the discovery of Legionella bacteria in the water supply. According to media reports, police and ambulance services arrived at the scene after the body was found this morning. Rishi Sunak has told MPs he'll listen to suggestions for tightening the safety of the Rwanda bill, but he will not commit to any amendments, a warning the following contains flashing images. The Prime Minister's fighting for his political future as he attempts to persuade a group of rebel Tory MPs to back the legislation ahead of a key vote. Right-wing Conservatives will meet this evening to make a final decision on whether to vote against the safety of the bill or to abstain. While some Tory MPs have given their support, they've warned against any attempts to harden the measures. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accused the Tory party of being too self-involved to govern. 3 men have died and 2 others suffered life-threatening injuries after a collision between a bus and a car. The incident happened at 7 o'clock last night in Coedili in Wales. 2 young men aged 18 and 1 aged 19 were declared dead at the scene. Fire control staff will stage a series of strikes after Christmas in their staffing dispute. Members of the Fire Brigades Union on Merseyside will walk out for 8 consecutive days from December the 27th. They voted in August to take the action, opposing claims of a reduction in night staff and the introduction of a duty shift system the union says it didn't agree to. Schools awaiting an Ofsted inspection can now defer the visit until after the new year, and all requests will be granted. It comes after the result of the coroner's report into the death of head teacher Ruth Perry, whose family say she took her own life when her school was downgraded from its highest rating to its lowest over safeguarding concerns. Two school leaders' unions say simply granting inspection deferrals to schools at the end of term does not go far enough. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
The Rwanda debate has started. James Cleverley's on his feet. Let's listen in.
France, with Bulgaria, with Turkey, Italy, Georgia, and Ethiopia. 50 hotels are being returned to the local communities, and the initial asylum backlog, which stood at 92,000, is now under 20,000. We have sent back 22,000 illegal migrants, and the UK's arrangement with Albania proves that deterrents work. Last year, not just yet, I've just started. Last year, a third of all those arriving in small boats to the coast of this country were Albanian. This year, we've returned 5,000 Albanians, and arrivals from that country are down by 90%, 90%. But in recent years, some of the government's efforts to tackle illegal migration and deport foreign national offenders have been frustrated by a seemingly endless cycle of legal challenges and rulings from domestic and foreign courts. Of course, just momentarily, of course, this government respects court judgments, even when we disagree with them. But Parliament and the British people want an end to illegal immigration, and they support the Rwanda plan.
I'm very grateful to the Home Secretary for giving way, but he's pointed to deterrence, and he's often used the Australian model of offshoring detention centres as a gold standard. What are his comments then, the fact that Australia has recently shut down their offshore centre because of the high financial and human costs?
Home Secretary. The Honourable Lady raises the case of Australia. Their illegal migrations by boats, 55,000 they had, trended pretty much down to zero. Deterrence works. Deterrence works.
I thank my right honourable friend, I'm sure, will agree that the British are world champions at queuing. We don't like queue jumpers, which is why illegal immigration grates with us. Can he confirm that the government will take all steps to ensure that we will remain within international law, just not now, but going forward? In which case, I will certainly be supporting the bill tonight. But can he also, does he also agree with me that some colleagues in this place need to be careful what they wish for?
Secretary. So I am confident, and indeed the conversations that I've had with the government's legal advisers reinforce my belief that the actions that we are taking, whilst novel, whilst very much pushing at the edge of the envelope, are within the framework of international law. And that is important. That is important because the UK is a country that demonstrates to the whole world the importance of international law. We champion that on the world stage, and it's important that we demonstrate it. I'm going to make further progress. Judges, of course, play an important role. But they are not policymakers, they should not be policymakers. And so when the courts find a particular formulation of policy unlawful, it is the job of politicians to listen to their views, respect their views, and find a solution. I will make further progress. Thanks to the efforts on the part of the UK government and the government of Rwanda, that is exactly what we have done in response to the verdict from the Supreme Court. The new treaty that I signed last week with Rwanda and the bill that accompanies it are game-changing. The principle of relocating people to a safe country to have their asylum claim processed there is entirely consistent with the terms of the Refugee Convention. Both the High Court and the Court of Appeal unanimously confirmed this point.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. He was an excellent Foreign Secretary, so he will know the extraordinary tensions that exist between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. The Democratic Republic of Congo accuses Rwanda of sponsoring the M23 terrorist organization, which is violating Congolese women and killing Congolese soldiers. The Congolese president has named the Rwandan president as a Hitler-like figure this week. What is his response to the concerns of our Congolese friends in this regard?
In my formal role, I had extensive conversations with both the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda. We do not agree with that assessment of the government of Rwanda. And more importantly, other international organisations also rely heavily on Rwanda. The UNHCR, the European Union, these are organisations which rely heavily on Rwanda. They would not do that. They would not do that if they believed Rwanda was an unsafe country. I do intend to make further progress. There's a second reading debate. There will be plenty of opportunity for colleagues to speak. No,
Can I thank the Minister for giving way? Minister, just yesterday I received correspondence which I need to quote. EU Council Directive 2005/85/EC is caught by Article 2 of the Protocol, therefore can be relied upon in Northern Ireland but not in the GB in relation to the Rwanda bill coming forward. Article 7 confers the right to remain in the territory whilst a claim is being processed. This clearly creates additional rights in the NI which doesn't apply in GB and expressly frustrates the core intent of the Rwanda bill for applying in Northern Ireland. Has the Minister had the opportunity to look to that?
Home Secretary. The point he makes about differential treatment in different parts of the United Kingdom is one that we are conscious of. As the bill progresses, of course, he will have, and others will have, the opportunity to raise concerns about specific details, and we will, of course, listen to his and the concerns of others. This bill attempts, and this bill, when passed, will address the practical implications. At the moment, the challenges of numbers of refugees in Northern Ireland is not one that is as significant as in other parts of the UK, but we're always conscious to make sure that all parts of the UK, and he has heard me say this before, that all parts of the UK are and feel that they are in the thinking of the government as we move forward. I am going to make further progress. As I say, the principle of relocating people to a safe country to have their asylum claims processed is entirely consistent. And as I say, the High Court and the Court of Appeal unanimously confirm this. And the Supreme Court, in their findings 3 weeks ago, did not dispute those findings. I will give way, and then
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend. Does he agree that it is clear in international law and also in relation to the question of the rule of law that where in this country, with our unwritten constitution, a clear and unambiguous use of words clearly establishing the intention of Parliament in the enactment of a law does in fact take precedence over international law in accordance with the judgments of Lord Hoffman and also other judgments and statements made by Lord Judge, Lord Denning and other very distinguished jurists, including in relation to this particular judgment last month in paragraph 144.
Secretary. My honourable and learned friend makes an important point, and he is right, that when the wording of a bill is clear and unambiguous, where there is a deeming clause, that is the express will of the Parliament, that Parliament is sovereign, and that thinking must be adhered to through the legal process. So he is right on that. I am going to make progress. I am going to make progress. A few weeks ago, the Supreme Court upheld the judgment of the Court of Appeal, meaning that we cannot yet lawfully remove people to Rwanda. This is because of concerns that they expressed that relocated individuals might be refooled. And I'm sure the House knows, but that is that they might be redeported to a third country. The government disagreed with that verdict, but as I said, we respect the verdict.
And there we have James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, opening that debate. He's just going into the argument about refoulement now, which we know the bill says will not happen as the new treaty that's signed with Rwanda has guaranteed it. Interestingly, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, walked into that statement a couple of minutes in, sat down right next to the Home Secretary, expressing his support for this too. A real crunch few hours now in Parliament.
Yes, this debate will be going on throughout the afternoon into the evening before that vote, so we'll keep you updated on everything that's going on in the Commons. But we're going to cross now to our political editor, Christopher Hope, who joins us from Westminster. Christopher, thank you for joining us. What have you got for us?
Well, I was struck by that exchange there between Sybille Cash and James Cleverly. Now, Sybille Cash is the chairman of the Star Chamber group of Tory MPs, the lawyers who've been going over the detail for the so-called 5 families of the right of the party, the European Research Group, New Conservatives and others. And the exchange was fascinating. Sybille Cash said, is it right that a clear and unambiguous use of words can take precedence over international law? And Cleverly agrees. And I wonder whether this idea of hardening language in the bill, which is what was told us by Richard Holden, the chairman of the party, at midday on this channel, is that's what they mean, to be more explicit about what this bill means. And that might be enough to get some rebels over the line. I wonder if that idea of hardening language is what Cleverly was saying just then. Just to scroll back there, what we're seeing now is a crucial 7 hours of debate in the House of Commons as the Tory party, tries to find a way through this issue with the Rwanda bill, whether it can actually make flights take off. For me, though, I've been thinking about this quite in detail recently. The problem almost goes back to the PM, Mr. Sunak. He said he wanted to stop the boats. We've asked repeatedly in meetings with the PM and his team, what does stop the boats mean? They say it means stop the boats. And if that's the challenge, then for the right of the party, the only answer is to pull out of the ECHR, because Keir Starmer was asked on the radio today, he couldn't say that. If you're going to have this absolutist position on ending illegal migration, then therefore an answer might need to be as absolute as that, and not go halfway house and allow individual challenges, which is what this bill does. And I wonder whether he's made a rod for his own back, Tom and Emily.
And yet, what James Cleverly was saying there, Chris, was that it is okay. It is constitutional in this country, under our unwritten constitution, for Parliament to assert its own will, even if that's in contravention to some sort of international agreement. Dare I say it, even if that's in contravention to the ECHR. We saw France do that just last week with regard to the deportation or otherwise of its people in contravention to the ECHR. Could it not be the case that the UK doesn't have to leave the ECHR? It can just simply say, on this area, we're not going to listen.
Have the full chance to speak.
That certainly appears to be the position of Bill Cash, who is the kind of great mind behind all this. And that may be where it's going. There may be some hardening of language on the fact that Parliament is sovereign on this. That's the nature of our unwritten constitution. Will that be enough? We don't know. There's a big meeting at 5:15 today of the so-called 5 families of the Tory right wing of the party, the ERG, New Conservatives, Northern Research Group, Common Sense Group, and one more, whose name I forgot, ERG. They're meeting at 5:15, and they will then determine how to vote. It only needs 29 Tory MPs to vote against to sink it. I have been told on good authority Labour are likely then to submit a motion of no confidence tomorrow in the government. If the government loses that, we'll have an election in January. That's unlikely because it's likely that Tory MPs will support the government, but the party will look more and more damaged in the eyes of the electorate. There's a chance here for the Tory party to do something to reverse Labour's lead, because they have got an idea on immigration different to what Labour have got. Labour's idea goes no further than the Tories' idea on enforcement. If Rwanda works, and Labour are pledged to reverse Rwanda if they win power, if Rwanda works, it will be something with which to beat Labour with at the next election, and that's the prize at stake here for the Tory party.
Just one quick thing for you, Chris. We're seeing reports that Graham Stewart, the energy minister, is now being told to fly back from Dubai 3,000 miles in time for the vote tonight. Is that because the government is worried about losing?
Well, yes, that is confirmed by Number 10 in the morning lobby meeting that, of course, I think COP28, which I was lucky enough to go to 2 weeks ago for GB News viewers, actually was meant to close yesterday. As ever, though, COP28, it goes over to try and generate a degree of jeopardy and to force overtired and exhausted diplomats to agree to get a deal on emissions. Now, all 198 or so countries there have to all agree, so we need to have Graham Stewart in COP in Dubai, but he's been flown back, and that's an indication of the tightness of the vote. We're flying back a minister just this vote. He'll be back in COP tomorrow. It's very, very tense and very tight in Westminster, Tom and Emily.
A round trip, flying, what was that round trip? Over 6,000 miles there and back to the climate conference. Extraordinary.
Not panicking at all. Thank you very much, Christopher Hope, there, our political editor from Westminster. Now, we will bring you the very latest from this crunch debate that's in the House of Commons at the moment as we get it. But moving on.
Yes, an emergency budget meeting has taken place in Birmingham, with the City Council setting out a credible plan for addressing a £300 million budget gap over the next 2 years.
Yes, rises in council tax, selling off council-owned assets and redundancies are all under consideration to tackle the extremely serious and challenging situation.
Well, joining us now with the update is our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson. And Jack, it looks like you've got a guest. What do you have for us?
Yeah, good afternoon to you both. So, of course, the latest financial report into the state of the finances of Birmingham City Council and how they're trying to get a grip of the City Council finances, and that bankruptcy was published a few days ago. It's been presented to the Cabinet meeting today, and as we understand it, endorsed by the Cabinet with its recommendations. I'm here with the Leader of the Opposition on Birmingham City Council, Councillor Robert Alden from the Birmingham Local Conservatives. Robert, tell me what you really took away from that Cabinet meeting today as that financial report on the state of the Council's finances was presented to it.
Well, it's an unprecedented situation that Labour administration here in Birmingham have found themselves in. They got a negative reserves position of minus 678 million. They got to make 300 million's worth of savings, yet have only identified less than half of them. And now they've admitted they're going to be setting a deficit budget next year and want to capitalise that expenditure rather than paying it through the revenue budget. What that means to people at home is it's the equivalent to you taking out a loan to pay your mortgage. This is no way to run an organisation, and it's going to mean that residents suffer more in the long run.
Yes, you mentioned some of the savings that they've already managed to calculate. They reckon it's around £150 million worth. Now, £72.8 million of that is on services reduction. I mean, do you have any more of an indication about what services they're looking to cut? Because there seems to be, for the residents here, that ambiguity of actually what they might then be losing as this council looks to cut its budget.
Well, this is one of the really concerning things. There's just no openness and transparency from the administration. You've got a Labour group here who's saying they're going to be saving up to 300 million over the next 2 years, and yet they won't tell residents what services are going. Is it their bin collections are going? Is it street cleansing? Is it adult social care support? There's just no openness about where these savings are going to fall.
I mean, Labour and this administration say that they are focused on the job. They say they are being transparent at every possible chance, and of course are trying to consult residents. Do you feel that they are committing to, they're showing that commitment? Do you think that they are doing the residents of this city a service?
Well, words are cheap, and sadly the Labour administration is showing they're not following through with that. From whether it's the commissioners highlighting the lack of work on the budget over the summer, which is partly why the council is now in this mess of not being able to balance next year's books, or the openness not being shown here by being honest with residents about where services are going to fall, or indeed even how much they're planning to put up council tax. All they've admitted is that they're asking the government to put it up more. They've not said how much they're asking for.
Right, Councillor Robert Alden, thank you very much for joining us here this afternoon for that latest on the council's worries.
Thank you. They're in a very sticky situation. It seems not good for Birmingham residents.
No.
Coming up, the latest from the Commons as the Home Secretary sets out what he calls clear and unambiguous legislation on the Rwanda bill. See you soon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. For some northwestern areas, it will turn drier and clearer throughout the night, and it could be a bit of a frosty start, but there will be some further rain to come further east as this low pressure moves east across the country, dragging with it some fronts as well. So that will continue to bring some heavy rain to northeastern areas of England. The rain should slowly start to clear more eastern areas of Scotland, but we'll continue to see some heavy showers into this evening. But things do tend to dry out from the northwest overnight, so we'll see some clear spells developing across much of Scotland as well as parts of Northern Ireland, so we could see a touch of frost by tomorrow morning. Further east though, that rain and cloud will sink into parts of East Anglia and parts of Kent and Sussex as well, bringing quite a lot of cloud by tomorrow morning, so it'll be a bit of a dull start to the day. We'll also see some rain moving into these eastern areas through mid-morning as well. Further north and west, though, a dry and bright day, a much better day than today, with some long-lived sunshine throughout the day, though temperatures will still be a little bit on the cooler side after a slightly colder start to the day. Through Thursday, we'll see the next batch of rain push eastwards, but it will tend to fizzle out as it does move into more eastern areas. So although cloud will thicken, the rain will be much more limited. That's because pressure is building by the end of the week. So that means we'll see more in the way of drier weather by the end of the week and the weekend, and temperatures rising by day and night.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist. And you survived? I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like? I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three. Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 1 o'clock on Tuesday, the 12th of December. Coming up.
Rwanda reckoning. The Home Secretary James Cleverly says that the Rwanda bill is game-changing as he opens the crunch debate in the Commons. But will he be able to persuade enough MPs ahead of the crucial vote this evening? MPs are even flying around the world to make it back in time.
Migrant dies on Bibby Stockholm barge. Early reports from the CEO of the charity Care for Calais have suggested the asylum seeker took his own life on board. We'll bring you more detail as we get it.
And bankrupt Birmingham. The people of Birmingham have been threatened with a huge council tax rise and reduced services in the new year. But is your council at risk of bankruptcy too?
Now, there was one question asked by Sir Bill Cash, which struck a chord.
Absolutely, and of course Bill Cash, of that star chamber of lawyers, a distinguished legal brain himself, referring to the judgments that have been made by legal scholars in the past about what takes precedence, national or international law. And what Bill Cash was saying, when an Act of Parliament is clear and unambiguous in its intention, the courts must take that act of the British Parliament as being in precedence above that of international law, of international treaties.
So, Tom, does that mean that this bill will do the job that the government says it will?
In the view of the government. But of course, Bill Cash comes from that star chamber that said there are holes in the bill with regard to individual circumstances. So ultimately, what this means is that the bill will not be struck down. The bill itself will deem Rwanda a safe country. Courts will have to abide by the idea that Rwanda is a safe country. The quibble that Bill Cash had, that he didn't raise in that question but has raised in previous days, is that even though the country as a whole will be deemed safe, some individuals will be still making complaints and through individual circumstances may be able to avoid it. However, there's some very interesting wording in the bill, which we'll get to a bit later, about why that is a very tightly written section.
We've been doing a deep dive into the legislation to find those potential holes. But let us know, would you back the bill? If you were a Conservative MP, would you choose to back the bill, or indeed a Labour MP or whatever other party that gets a vote? Would you back it? Do you think it will work? GB Views at gbnews.com, let us know. But first, is your headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary says Parliament and the British people support the Rwanda plan. James Cleverly is addressing the Commons as a debate on the second reading of the Safety of Rwanda bill begins. In his opening statement, he confirmed a migrant has died aboard the Bibby Stockholm barge. The Home Secretary then moved on to tout the government's success on small boat crossings.
Judges, of course, play an important role. But they are not policymakers, they should not be policymakers. And so when the courts find a particular formulation of policy unlawful, it is the job of politicians to listen to their views respect their views and find a solution. I will make further progress. Thanks to the efforts on the part of the UK government and the government of Rwanda, that is exactly what we have done in response to the verdict from the Supreme Court.
As you've heard, the Home Office confirmed the death of an asylum seeker on board the Bibby Stockholm barge. The first asylum seekers were brought back to the vessel, docked in Dorset in October, around 2 months after it was evacuated following the discovery of Legionella bacteria in the water supply. According to media reports, police and ambulance services arrived at the scene after the body was found this morning. The Prime Minister is fighting for his political future as he attempts to persuade a group of rebel Tory MPs to back the Rwanda legislation ahead of a key vote. Right-wing Conservatives will meet this evening to make a final decision on whether to vote against the Safety of Rwanda bill or to abstain. While some Tory MPs have given their support, they've warned against any attempts to harden the measures. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accused the Tory party of being too self-involved to govern, adding that he thinks the legislation would pass at a second reading.
We're all stuck in their psychodrama, all being dragged down to their level. And that's what they just don't understand. While they're swanning around self-importantly with their factions and their star chambers, fighting like rats in a sack, there's a country out here that isn't being governed. A country that needs leadership.
3 men have died and 2 others suffered life-threatening injuries after a collision between a bus and a car. The incident happened at 7 o'clock last night in Coedili in Wales. 2 young men aged 18 and 1 aged 19 were declared dead at the scene. Fire control staff will stage a series of strikes after Christmas in their staffing dispute. Members of the Fire Brigades Union on Merseyside will walk out for 8 consecutive days from the 27th of December. They voted in August to take the action, opposing claims of a reduction in night staff and the introduction of a duty shift system that the union says it never agreed to. Schools awaiting an Ofsted inspection can now defer the visit until after the new year, and all requests will be granted. It comes after the result of the coroner's report into the death of head teacher Ruth Perry, whose family say she took her own life when her school was downgraded from its highest rating to its lowest over safeguarding concerns. 2 school leaders' unions say simply granting inspection deferrals to schools at the end of term does not go far enough. Child killer Lucy Letby does not object to being stripped of her nursing credentials, the court has heard. The 2-day hearing will decide if Letby should be removed from the register. Letby filled out a form where she was asked if she accepts the Nursing and Midwifery Council's charges. She said, "I accept the fact of the convictions and I maintain my innocence in respect of all the convictions." In August, the 33-year-old was sentenced to 14 whole life orders after she was convicted of the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murders of 6 others. The pace of wage growth has eased back by more than expected, whilst UK unemployment remains unchanged. The Office for National Statistics says wages rose by 7.3% in the 3 months to October, which is down from 7.8% in the previous 3 months. This was the steepest fall in earnings growth since the 3 months to November 2021. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt said it's positive to see inflation continue to fall and real wages growing. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just coming up to 8 minutes past 1. And speaking in the last half of an hour in the House of Commons, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has defended the government's renewed attempts at its Rwanda plan.
Judges, of course, play an important role. But they are not policymakers, they should not be policymakers. And so when the courts find a particular formulation of policy unlawful, it is the job of politicians to listen to their views, respect their views, and find a solution. I will make further progress. Thanks to the efforts on the part of the UK government and the government of Rwanda, That is exactly what we have done in response to the verdict from the Supreme Court.
This comes as the Prime Minister tries to avert a damaging rebellion by right-wing Tory MPs over his Rwanda plan ahead of a crunch vote tonight.
Yes, both the flagship scheme and arguably Sunak's premiership depend on the outcome of tonight's key vote.
Our political editor, Christopher Hope, is in Westminster for us. Christopher, can you bring us the latest?
Well, we've heard, haven't we, there from James Cleverly. I think you've been talking on air there, Tom and Emily, about the exchange there with Bill Cash, the government making clear to this leader of the kind of so-called five families, a grouping of Tory MPs who are very concerned about the Rwanda bill, making very clear to them that Parliament is sovereign and can overrule other courts. And the comment there by Bill Cash, quoting previous senior judges, seems to support that. I wonder whether that's where we're going, possibly with hardening up the language in this bill as it goes towards, and it should probably pass tonight, is the hope the government have anyway. And clearly they're saying if you do get it through, we will then try and harden the language at the amendment stage. Earlier I spoke to the party chairman, Richard Holden. He had this to say about what the government might do to win round the rebels.
Any Tory MP should be backing the principle of tougher immigration controls, which is exactly what's on the table today. There's obviously further detail, and as the government's made clear, if there's any tweaks that can be made to toughen it up further, then they're open to discussions on that. But we've got to be there really strong on the principle of tougher rules.
So the key word there, open to discussions and toughening up. That clearly is the offer being made right now by the whips to those on the right of the party. The left are sorted out. The One Nation caucus said last night they will support this bill. But it's a very tight landing strip, we're hearing from sources close to James Cleverly, to get this right, because if they go too far, if they harden it even further away from the left wing of the party, the left will lose support for it. So it's a very difficult place for the PM to be in. Right now, those five groupings of Tory MPs are meeting at 5:15 in Portcullis House, the offices next door to Parliament, to decide what to do. They're due to end that meeting around 6:30, and process straight to the chamber and decide how to vote. It only needs 29 Tory MPs to vote against to defeat the government and probably prompt a no confidence vote in the government by Labour tomorrow. Around 56 or 60 or so people, if they abstain, if enough Tories abstain from it, that will be enough too. So it's very, very tense. It does feel very much like the Brexit wars, the Brexit days of late 2018. We've got ministers being flown back from around the world. Graham Stewart, the COP28 minister, flown back just as he's trying to agree a deal at that COP summit in Dubai. He's on a plane back with a huge burning energy and loads of racking up the air miles just to get the government out of a sticky situation. I mean, it looks awful. It is awful. We are 4 years since this party won a landslide. It doesn't feel like it, does it?
Chris, when governments try and bus in MPs, whether it's the 1970s and MPs turn up in ambulances and are wheeled through in wheelchairs just to get those votes in, or MPs have to return, cut short trips, travel around the world, like we saw in the dying days of the Theresa May administration as well, those were times when the government didn't have a majority. Those were times when Parliament sat on a knife edge, when things... Today, the government has a notional majority of 56 in the House of Commons. How on earth has it got to this stage?
It's because the Tory party is a coalition of different groupings, don't have a lot in common apart from an idea of cutting taxes, being tough on law and order, and maybe immigration. But how you get there is disputed by the different groupings. Boris Johnson held that together. He created this coalition of interests to create that built this majority back in 2019. He's now gone, and poor old Rishi Sunak's trying to hold it together. I mean, Mr. Sunak is a decent man, and I think someone who is doing his best as Prime Minister. I wonder whether he has the political skill to hold this together. It's not easy, and he needs some help and support from the team around him, and it's challenging. But he met with those new Conservative grouping today for their bacon butties and coffee in Downing Street at 8 this morning. I gather not many minds were changed by that. He took aim at previous other Tory MPs leaders saying this is where we are. I'm not sure he persuaded them in the room, and that's indeed probably where he lacks some of Boris Johnson's ability to do that and to connect with an audience. But he's doing his best. The party's got to get through this. They're going to have Mr Sunak as their leader for the next election, barring a calamity. They've got to get behind him. And part of that is delivering on this Rwanda plan, which does actually offer something different to what Labour have got to offer, which is nowhere near as robust.
A very difficult position to be in as some of these Conservative MPs. They feel that this bill does not go far enough, but surely quite a large part of them don't want to vote against their own government.
And also,
it's a tricky decision to make.
Also, ultimately, it goes further than where we are now. So even if it seems to be incomplete, as Bill Cash and his allies have been saying, it still goes further than the status quo today.
But in their minds will be the fact that the clock is ticking down towards that general election, and if they don't get it right now, and if those votes don't stop coming...
Yeah. And what no one's saying, Emily and Tom, is that a narrow victory for the Tories tonight will be an invitation to peers to try and amend it. Now, what they needed, as Tom knows, as a student of the Constitution, they needed a big win tonight in the House of Commons to demonstrate to peers in the House of Lords that the clear will of the Commons is this must go through. A narrow win of single digits or low tens will be an invitation to the House of Lords, where the government hasn't got a majority, to amend this and make it softer, make it not even as robust as it is at the moment. That's what the right are playing with at the moment.
I must say also, Christopher, I am also a student of the Constitution, just as Tom Harwood is here. Thank you very much
sorry,
indeed.
Emily.
That's
sorry.
quite all right. That's quite all right.
Of course you are.
Thank you very much, Christopher.
I don't know. I think Christopher,
our political editor.
What was your... Yeah, anyway, I don't want to defend Chris here, just in terms of, strictly speaking, what has been studied, rather than understanding in the current time, which I think no one would dispute.
No, it's there's several degrees, including politics.
Yeah. Oh,
so there you go. Anyway,
very
that's not of interest.
No.
Anyway.
But moving on, an asylum seeker has died on the Bibby Stockholm barge. Docked in Dorset, the death will be investigated fully, the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, has told the Commons.
Yes, early reports have suggested the asylum seeker died by suicide, but these are just reports at the moment and we cannot verify.
Well, our reporter Ray Addison joins us now for more. Ray, what do we understand?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned there the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, within the last half an hour, making that statement to MPs in the Commons and saying at this stage he's uncomfortable getting into any more details about that death, but of course saying they will investigate fully. What we do know is that the Dorset police received reports of a sudden death of a resident on the Bibby Stockholm barge in Portland in Dorset at around 6:22 this morning. They responded along with ambulance crews. Now, they are conducting an investigation that has been opened and the coroner has been informed as well. At this stage, we don't know the person's age, we don't know their country of origin or what caused their death. What we do know is that there have been unconfirmed reports of suicide that we cannot obviously confirm. Freedom from Torture has responded, saying that until this government stops forcing refugees into unsafe and undignified accommodation, we will continue to see horrific stories of deaths, suicide attempts, serious health issues and unnecessary suffering. Care for Calais issued a similar statement as well. And we know that 39 men who previously stayed on the barge had issued a letter to the Home Office describing how they found conditions on the Bibby Stockholm terrifying, like a prison. They said it left them feeling stress and anxiety, and they reported in that letter that one asylum seeker had unsuccessfully attempted suicide. Of course, former Home Secretary Suella Braverman has previously insisted that the Bibby Stockholm barge is safe. However, it has been beset with problems ever since the government decided to house asylum seekers there. Of course, it was initially designed for 200 people, the barge, modified to house 500. That prompted legal challenges, which were unsuccessful. The move-in, though, was delayed after the Fire Brigades Union branded the barge a potential death trap. Ultimately, we do know that migrants moved in on the 7th of August, then they had to be evacuated just 4 days later after the discovery of Legionella bacteria.
Thank you very much, Ray Addison, for bringing us the latest on that death in the Bibby Stockholm barge. Now, we're going to zoom out and have a look at the economy because wage growth in the UK has slowed over the last quarter. Employment levels also declined, fueling speculation that the Bank of England will elect to keep interest rates on hold at its meeting this Thursday.
Yes, although the ONS's latest measure of pay growth was amongst the highest since records began 2 decades ago, there are signs that weak economic growth amid high inflation have prompted companies to curb pay, along with hiring fewer staff.
So joining us now is Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business Research, Vicky Price. Vicky, thank you very much. Should we be surprised by any of this data?
Not really. I think it was expected that there was going to be a bit of a slowdown. I mean, the thing to remember is that we've had a period over the summer where loads of bonuses were given, particularly to the public sector, and where we suddenly saw public sector wages, move up faster on year-on-year basis than was the case for the private sector, where that's now been slowly reversed. So we have the private sector seeing more of an increase, but nothing huge, about 7.3% growth in regular earnings. And we've seen the public sector about 6.9%. So, but it is still quite a high figure. And the interesting thing as well is that it is, in fact, now a period when we're seeing real wage growth taking place. So it's not just nominal growth. Until recently, inflation was higher than earnings increases, but now it isn't. So in the last 3 months, we saw an increase of about 1.3% in real terms for wage growth, which is good news. I think it should, make people perhaps feel happier. We're hearing quite a lot of positive stuff, changes that are happening in service demand and bookings over Christmas being very, very high in pubs, apparently. So there is a bit of a reprieve, really, for people. At the same time, what we're hearing is that perhaps, indeed, as you said at the beginning, interest rates may start coming down faster than perhaps the Bank of England is suggesting at present. So that may be good news as well.
Well, that's really interesting because I suppose the real question here is, will people start to feel this in their pockets as soon as next year? That's the question that Rishi Sunak will be thinking. It all depends on election timing as well. Of course, wage growth slower, but inflation lower. So real wage growth taking place. Are people going to feel it?
They probably will be, because, of course, remember, we've also been having the sort of pleasure, if you like, for those who are paying national insurance contributions as well, of a reduction of 2 percentage points in that happening from January. Sorry, happening from, I may be wrong there. I think it is January.
No, I think it is January.
Rather than February.
Yeah, they brought it
is January. Which is good news as well. So yes, there will be a little bit coming into people's pockets. Plus, of course, we have the increase in the minimum wage, which is really quite significant. Just about 10% increase is not bad at all for people at the lower end of the pay scale. So yes, now the real problem then is it going to be sufficient to offset what's happening in all the other costs that people have? Although NICs are coming down, what we're also seeing, of course, is that because of stealth taxes, tax take is increasing. So loads of people, millions of people are coming into paying tax for the first time now. And those at the higher rate as well, bigger number are paying that higher rate, which they weren't doing before, probably never contemplated they would do that before because personal allowances have been frozen. Yeah. And also, of course, these interest rates, mortgage rates. If they start coming down faster than people anticipated, then that would be good news. But it's still hugely more expensive to borrow right now than it was a year ago.
Yeah, it seems depending on who you talk to, some people are saying that interest rates will come down. Others are saying they may go even higher in the near future. Anyway, we shall see what happens. But Vicky, thank you very much for giving us your assessment, Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business Research. I do wonder how much people will be spending this Christmas, whether that will be down on last year or up. We'll find out later.
And also, people always say, oh, we're going to raise the minimum wage, everyone will feel better off. But what if that small shop that employs a few people on minimum wage then has to put up all its prices to afford the minimum wage? And a 10% increase in that minimum wage could just mean a 10% increase on prices in the shop. So perhaps we won't feel better after all.
Yeah, there's always unintended consequences for labour market regulation, isn't there? But coming up, we'll be at the High Court because protesters are once again facing off with the Department of Transport over controversial plans, this time surrounding Stonehenge. More on that after this short break.
We
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's
my new
It's
teeth.
your new teeth.
I
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just gone 1:27, and you're with us here on Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. But the Save Stonehenge campaign World Heritage Site group is bringing a new legal challenge against the Transport Secretary's decision to approve a road tunnel scheme near the monument.
Yes, so the campaigners did manage to block the scheme just 2 years ago. The scheme would see a £1.7 billion project erect a 2-mile tunnel next to the site, along with 8 miles of new road. And as you can imagine, it's such a beautiful and historic landmark that lots of people aren't too impressed.
Although, as I understand it, the tunnel will be further away than the current road. But let's get more information on this, because the whole idea is it's a relief road to stop there being such disturbance. I'm a little bit confused by it all. Let's see if we can make sense of it with our GB News national reporter Theo Chakomba outside the High Court. Theo, what's the complaint of those campaigning against this?
Yes, well, a very good afternoon to you both. So it's a number of things. Some are from different groups who have come here. There are dozens of campaigners, some part of groups who go to have entertainment activities there, and others are local residents, and others actually live in different parts of England, such as London, but are so passionate that there shouldn't be any change in this area. Now, it's a fresh road challenge. As you mentioned, there was another hearing which took place in 2021, and they are arguing that if the plans go ahead, it could put the site's World Heritage status at risk and describe the move as vandalism. Now, the Save Stonehenge World Heritage Site and the Stonehenge Alliance is challenging this decision, which is estimated to cost around £1.7 billion. And they say, well, that money could be spent on other things instead of putting in a tunnel, which could, in some few years, be out of date. That's what one person I spoke to just a few minutes ago was arguing. Now, Highways England, leading this project, say it will reduce journey times from around 1 hour to around 8 minutes. That road, which passes by Stonehenge, is quite narrow. It's one lane each side, and at peak times it can take people around 1 hour. And they say 8 minutes is how long it will take people if they're able to put this tunnel and reduce that traffic in that area, particularly for locals and businesses as well. Now, we've also heard from others who are part of this, and they're saying, well, the court needs to ensure that this doesn't go ahead.
Very interesting. I've driven down that road quite a few times, and you do get a bit of a bottleneck.
You do,
because everyone wants to have a look at the site, so you end up being in traffic. Although I must admit, I was one of those people.
Yes,
I do slow down to have a look. Perhaps I shouldn't do that.
Well, it's interesting, though, because I suppose the utility of the tunnel is that people won't slow down because there's nothing to see. Theo, how long do you think that this sort of campaigning will go on?
Well, it's been going on for some years now. This is, as I say, it's a fresh appeal for this not to go ahead. So it's the second time, and this the first time they did win. But now it does seem like it's going to go ahead. We understand from Highways England that plans which are in place will start being unveiled in 2024, and work will start to begin. But for many people who are here, they say simply this isn't the right idea for this area, and it will destroy what is a place visited by around 1 million people a year. And as Emily just mentioned, you have been passing through that area. So it's a busy place, and they say simply it should remain as it is.
Yes, I mean, clearly there are lots of people who want to drive in that direction, and therefore there needs to be some more infrastructure. I'm just reading here a report about this. They say a group of mostly retired archaeologists, environmentalists, historians, transport experts, countryside campaigners and druids. These are all these are the people who wish to stop this tunnel being built. I guess if it does lead to Stonehenge losing its heritage status, that's their concern anyway. Well, and that's not a good thing, is it? I can't
see how it would. I find that very, very hard to believe. I mean, surely it will be a less spoilt landscape. Thank you so much, Theo, for bringing us the very latest there. It does seem like a peculiar set of objections. I've been looking at a map. The proposed tunnel is to the south of the A303, further away from Stonehenge than the current road. And it will no longer be blighting the landscape because it will be in a tunnel.
Perhaps it's the construction of it.
I suppose, yeah, it'll be annoying for several years. That's what it's like.
Well, let us know at home if you live near Stonehenge or you use that road quite a lot. Let us know what you think. Do we need a tunnel there? Should these campaigners find something else to campaign about?
But isn't it typical? Not a single spade has gone in the ground, and it's been years and years and years of appeal and decision. And how much money have we spent on us trying to make a decision in the first place?
Right, I believe Yvette Cooper has just stood up in the House of Commons. She's been talking to James Cleverly, of course, the Home Secretary, who delivered his statement leading the debate on this Rwanda bill. The vote is tonight at about 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock.
About 7 o'clock, this crunch debate. Will this bill pass? That is the question on every MP's lips.
Absolutely, and of course the government does look a little bit frightened about this tetchy moment tonight, this sort of vote on tenterhooks, I suppose. suppose, because they're flying MPs back from around the world. Graham Stewart flying back from Dubai, but also various select committees that have been on fact-finding missions, very important fact-finding missions to various warm parts of the world. They're flying back early too.
From sunny Dubai to rainy Westminster, there you go, the life of a minister. But first, let's get your headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary says Parliament and the British people support the Rwanda plan. James Cleverly is addressing the Commons as the debate on the second reading of the Safety of Rwanda bill begins. In his opening statement, he confirmed a migrant has died aboard the Bibby Stockholm barge. The Home Secretary then moved on to tout the government's success on small boat crossings.
Judges, of course, play an important role. But they are not policymakers, they should not be policymakers. And so when the courts find a particular formulation of policy unlawful, it is the job of politicians to listen to their views, respect their views, and find a solution. I will make further progress. Thanks to the efforts on the part of the UK government and the government of Rwanda, that is exactly what we have done in response to the verdict from the Supreme Court.
Well, Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has criticised the Prime Minister's leadership in the lead-up to the vote this evening.
We've just got total Tory chaos. What a fine mess this weak Prime Minister has got them all into and got the country into as well. Tearing lumps out of each other over a failing policy while they let the country down. We've had a Home Secretary sacked, an Immigration Minister resigning, and they've spent almost £300 million of taxpayers' money on Rwanda without sending a single person, and the Home Secretary seemed to confirm today that, in fact, that is £400 million.
Well, the Prime Minister's fighting for his political future as he attempts to persuade a group of rebel Tory MPs to back the Rwanda legislation ahead of the key vote. Right-wing Conservatives will meet this evening to make a final decision on whether to vote against the Safety of Rwanda bill or abstain. While some Tory MPs have given their support, they've warned against any attempts to harden the measures. The Home Secretary's promised the death of the asylum seeker on the Bibby Stockholm barge will be investigated fully. The first asylum seekers were brought back to the vessel docked in Dorset in October, around 2 months after it was evacuated following the discovery of Legionella bacteria in the water supply. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2581 and 1.1642 euros. The price of gold is £1,582.97 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 at 7,570 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels we're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, the question of the day, will enough MPs back the bill this evening to get it through Parliament? This is, of course, the Rwanda bill. Joining us to discuss this are two excellent guests, broadcaster and historian David Oldroyd-Bolt and the former Labour MP Bill Rammell. Thank you very much indeed. So, will this bill go through, Bill?
Who knows? I think there's going to be a significant rebellion. Whether it's enough to defeat the bill, I don't know. We'll see at 7 o'clock this evening. But what it is demonstrating is that the government's in utter chaos. I think the reality is the Tory party is ungovernable at the moment. This bill is a gimmick, £300 million, and if it succeeds, a handful of people going to Rwanda. And underlying all of that, the basics of tackling immigration are not being got right, because what you need to do is you need to tackle the backlog of asylum claims, because that's the biggest pull factor for people coming to this country. You need returns agreement in place across Europe, the like of which we had when we were in the European Union, and hey presto, then we didn't have a small boats problem.
But Bill, we had more people coming into the UK through the Dublin Agreement than we had leaving. For the last 2 years of the arrangement, it was we were net importing EU migrants via that scheme.
But look across the sweep of time, and it worked effectively. And look, you know, if you want to make the comparison, we have now, you look at the net migration figures, 745,000 announced last week. That's about 4 times the level when Labour left office. This is a fiasco, and it needs a grip, and it needs to be got right. And the bill isn't doing that.
This is a problem that the whole of the Western world is facing now. We've seen what's happening on the US border to the south. We've seen the increases in Italy, in Greece, in France, in Spain, in Germany. All of these countries are seeing massive upticks. Do you blame it all on Brexit?
No, I'm not blaming it all on Brexit, but I think Brexit has contributed significantly. But you know, it's a problem that needs to be gripped. And one of the most foolish things that I think James Cleverly said in his opening statement in the House of Commons today was the public expect us to stop all illegal migration. That is for the birds. You know, as you've rightly said, there are challenges in terms of migration, both legal and illegal, across the planet. What you need is a firmer grip to reduce the numbers, and we're light years from that under this government.
Well, surely, geographically, David, we have more ability than mainland Europe to stop the tide of illegal immigration. Is it an impossibility?
You'd have thought that, given that we're surrounded by an enormous body of water and we have this thing called the Royal Navy, it shouldn't be too difficult. But I think the Rwanda bill is clearly a gimmick. It doesn't address the overriding problem, which is legal migration to this country is far, far too high, because we've become addicted over the past 25 years, largely due to the policies of Mr Brown and Mr Blair, to very low-wage immigration, suppressing the wages of Britons and bringing about stagnation. We need to wean ourselves off it. This is a drug that we've become addicted to. And this is also the case across much of Western Europe. Low-wage immigration keeps down wages across the continent, causing economic stagnation. It's the case in much of the United States. I was in Washington for a week recently, and the figure I was quoted was anywhere between 7 and 10 million illegal immigrants came across the border of the United States last year. Why is there so little will about it? Why is there so little political will really being put to this, except when people are so beyond furious that the governments can't ignore it?
Why do you think there is so little political will in your view?
I think it is because we have become, as an economy, extremely reliant on this. And there is not the political thought in the medium to long term as to how we reverse that.
And that's the crucial point, isn't it? If we closed the doors tomorrow, then suddenly all of these sectors that, quite frankly, don't pay that much, social care, for example, would find a big crisis of employment. Therefore, there needs to be a glide path, perhaps, to getting these numbers down. Is what the government has said, just to stick on legal migration for a moment, we'll return to Rwanda in a second. The government has announced all of these different controls on the raising of the income threshold to the capping of and removing of dependents. Is that the sort of path that will actually fix that problem?
It would be if those measures were anywhere near severe enough. £38,500 is not enough. It needs to be doubled.
Really?
I don't think we can any longer lie about this to people.
It's the top 25% of income earners.
Who do we want here? Do we want the very best people in the world coming here to work in those parts of the economy or in those positions that we cannot find from within, or that will add such enormous value to the economy and to our intellectual life that we can't ignore it? Or are we just going to say, well, you're just about good enough, come in?
And of course, Bill, we do have
hold on. If I can, let me just respond to that point. To double the minimum salary threshold would be reckless and irresponsible.
Time. I don't mean do it overnight, obviously.
Reckless and irresponsible. We need a long-term strategy to invest in education and skills. We need to abolish, as the government at last rightly did last week, the 20% salary threshold, so that foreigners can be enticed to come into the country for lower wages. We need that kind of long-term strategy. But if we do this overnight, people watching this programme who want their parents, their grandparents to be cared for in care homes, that would be blown away.
But do you understand how furious large swathes of the public are about migration being at such high levels? For a lot of people, it is their number one issue when it comes to how they may vote, or at least it's one of their highest political issues.
It's actually not. If you look at the polling evidence, it's about third or fourth, and the National Health Service and the economy comes way ahead. Now, I'm not going to say that 745,000 net migration is desirable or sustainable, but you need to tackle the problem effectively, and you need to do it sustainably. And we're not having that by the kind of gimmicks that we're getting from this government, populist gestures that have actually seen the numbers go through the roof.
OK, Bill, because I'm going to put this question to you. People often say the Rwanda bill, it's just a gimmick. This whole plan, it's not going to work, blah, blah, blah. It won't get through the courts, etc., etc. It's not desirable anyway, morally, ethically, whatever argument you want to put. What would a Labour government do differently? Because at the moment they talk about, a bit more cooperation with the French, a little bit more money here, a little bit more tackling people smugglers. But the government's already doing those things.
Well, I'll give you some practical examples. When I was a Foreign Office Minister, we looked at offshore processing. We eventually didn't go through with it because of the risks associated in the kind of scheme you've got with a country like Rwanda. But maybe offshore processing, to process the claims, not to leave them there forever, may be part of the solution. You also need to tackle...
But not with Rwanda.
Not with Rwanda. If you look at the human rights record in Rwanda in terms of extrajudicial killings, political prisoners, 87% of people of asylum claims being fed by the World Food Programme.
What country would Yvette Cooper be able to do this with very quickly?
I'm no longer a Labour frontbencher. I've not got that detail, but there are countries we can look to. But much more importantly is tackling the backlog in asylum claims. Last year, that figure was 10 times higher than it was when Labour left office, and that acts as a green light and a pull for people to come to this country illegally.
And yet, Bill, you mention the problems that you perceive in Rwanda. I've been reading through the bill that MPs are voting on at 7 p.m. this evening. It makes clear that courts cannot refer to any general problem about Rwanda in terms of not allowing people to go there. This bill would put in UK statute, which courts would have to refer to above any other sort of international obligation, would say that Rwanda is deemed safe as a result of the treaty we've just signed, and there is no Rwanda-specific issue that can prevent a flight. Does that not go far enough?
Well, I think that's wrong. I quoted Edward Garnier, former Attorney General in the last Conservative government, who said at the weekend, this bill is about saying that dogs are cats, and they're not. It's trying to run away from reality, and this is not the way forward. And also, I object in principle to people having the right to make legal claims. That's a principle of British law that we ought to be upholding.
And David, just quickly, as a historian, looking at the constitutional background to this, Parliament is sovereign. The government today saying it has the power to make this law that courts will have to abide by over and above international commitments.
Well, exactly the point. I would have thought that leaving the European Union was, in large part, so that we could, once again, have our own sovereignty and that we could, when it suited us and when politically necessary, disregard international treaties in this way. It is not at all without historical precedent. I don't think there is a moral or legal question about this. Parliament, if it decides to, can change the law of the land. That is why it is there. Parliament is primarily a legislative body. And if Parliament decides that this is a legal bill, if the House of Commons votes that this is a legal bill, it will become British law. It's that simple.
Right, now I want to turn our attention to a rather different story, and a story in France. It appears that France is having a Batley grammar moment. That was, of course, the school where a teacher showed a depiction of the Prophet Muhammad, and he was then forced to go in hiding, and I believe has been in hiding since, as a result of a backlash from Muslim parents and also from groups from outside the area as well. Now, this is in France. In this case, a teacher showed a Renaissance painting to the class, which featured nude women, as you see in these types of masterpieces, and this caused uproar among some Muslim parents, complaints from pupils and parents. And now the teachers being forced, they're striking in solidarity with this teacher, fears over safety. Bill?
If it's reported accurately, it's shocking. If you're a Muslim, either coming to a country in the West or being born in a country in the West, you have to abide by the norms and values of that country, and you can't operate as if you believe that you are living in an Islamic country. Part of education, whether it's schools, colleges, universities, is that you will be open to different views, some of which you won't like. If you're studying art, yes, you'll be shown paintings where there are nude figures within them. You don't have a right to object to that. This is the same school, as I understand it, the same area where 6 teenagers have just been arrested for coordinating the beheading of a student by facilitating his whereabouts and the information about him to an Islamic terrorist. This is fundamentally wrong.
Dave?
It speaks to a profound problem with integration. And yet, David, France is a country that has gone further than most in terms of trying to enforce a culture across the country. They have banned the hijab in schools. They have banned the burqa. They have made mosques, if they want to receive any sort of public accreditation, sign up to a set of values. These are things that would be considered perhaps on the fringes of policy in Britain, but a law in France. And it doesn't seem to be doing the assimilation work.
Well, I think France has done what any sensible nation would have done when faced with migration on the scale that the West has been faced with over the past quarter of a century. But there comes a critical mass. There comes a point at which the scale of immigration is so great and the building up of those communities within the host nation is so profound that no matter what the cultural policies of the nation, it will not be sufficient. Because those people are not going to change their minds, because most of the West has, in fact, spent the past half-century saying that they shouldn't. Saying that they can come here and they can live their lives in the way that they would in their home nations. It's just that now they get to do it with high salaries.
Now, I'm not sure if this happened at Batley Grammar. I don't think it did. But the teachers, staff members, have gone on strike in solidarity with this teacher. So these French teachers are putting their foot down, David, and saying, we will not stand by this type of intimidation. Presumably, they're saying, if we want to show a Renaissance painting, we can.
Whereas in Batley, you had the council, the police, the local MP all bowing down and saying, oh, no, I'm so sorry you were offended by this, with very little care for the man who is, as you say, still in hiding. He and his wife have had to change their identities, change their phone numbers, cut off all contact with their families because they were threatened with death. This is a problem of the most extraordinary and grave manner. And we need to stop being so tender about it. If people are threatening death for being exposed to ideas or works of art with which they disagree...
We're going to have to wrap it up there, David. Sorry to cut you up, but coming up in the next hour, we're bringing you updates from that Rwanda debate. Stay with us.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. For some northwestern areas, it will turn drier and clearer throughout the night, and it could be a bit of a frosty start, but there will be some further rain to come further east as this low pressure moves east across the country, dragging with it some fronts as well. So that will continue to bring some heavy rain to northeastern areas of England. The rain should slowly start to clear more eastern areas of Scotland, but we'll continue to see some heavy showers into this evening. But things do tend to dry out from the northwest overnight, so we'll see some clear spells developing across much of Scotland as well as parts of Northern Ireland. So we could see a touch of frost by tomorrow morning. Further east, though, that rain and cloud will sink into parts of East Anglia and parts of Kent and Sussex as well, bringing quite a lot of cloud by tomorrow morning, so it'll be a bit of a dull start to the day. We'll also see some rain moving into these eastern areas through mid-morning as well. Further north and west, though, a dry and bright day, a much better day than today, with some long-lived sunshine throughout the day, though temperatures will still be a little bit on the cooler side after a slightly colder start to the day. Through Thursday, we'll see the next batch of rain push eastwards, but it will tend to fizzle out as it does move into more eastern areas. So although cloud will thicken, the rain will be much more limited. That's because pressure is building by the end of the week. So that means we'll see more in the way of drier weather by the end of the week and the weekend, and temperatures rising by day and night.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Tuesday, the 12th of December. Coming up.
Rwanda reckoning. Home Secretary James Cleverly says the new Rwanda bill is game-changing and assures MPs that the East African nation stands ready to welcome migrants. But will he be able to persuade enough MPs ahead of the crucial vote this evening?
And this is all in the context of a migrant dying on the Bibby Stockholm barge. Early reports from the CEO of the charity Care for Calais have suggested that the asylum seeker took his own life on board. We'll bring you more detail as we get it.
New polling suggests that a fifth of the British public would back COVID restrictions being introduced, with those aged 25 to 42 most likely to back restrictions. So it's the young ones who want the restrictions.
Ridiculous.
Let us know what you think. Would you back a reintroduction of those measures?
Now, of course, we'll mention Rwanda in this big debate, big vote at 7 o'clock in a second. But on those COVID restrictions, millennials being the most in favour of them, I've got a theory about this, because they want to close nightclubs. I think that's the 25 to 42-year-olds who aren't invited on the nights out, who sit there scrolling on their social media accounts, seeing their friends having fun, thinking, I'm going to banish it all for everyone else. It's the jealous lot.
So, so people like you, really?
You think I don't go out?
It doesn't get invited out much.
No, I'm every weekend I'm very, I'm sitting at home.
He has to beg me every weekend to come out with him. You know,
Yes.
Emily, please come to the pub with me.
No, this is true. I sit there by myself reading books. Anyway, big debate in Parliament at the moment. 7 hours of debate. We're 2 hours into it. We can see live pictures from the House of Commons. SNP spokesman speaking there. But this debate is going on until the crunch point, this big vote at 7 p.m. this evening. And it's on a knife edge.
So it'll be about 7 hours that they're debating this all together before the vote. Now, it's hard to say, really, whether the vote will pass, whether this bill will pass, but it's looking more likely now, is it not?
Yes, I've seen a report in the last couple of minutes that Robert Jenrick, That's the immigration minister who resigned over the whole treaty situation and this potential bill. Sounds like he now may not vote against the emergency bill. He says, I want this bill to work. This bill could be so much better. Let's make it work.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see if there were any compromises, any promises given to him about how the bill may be reworded in the future. We shall see. But let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. Will this bill pass? Let's get the headlines with Tatiana.
3 minutes past 2, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary says Parliament and the British people support the Rwanda plan. James Cleverly addressed the Commons as the debate on the second reading of the Safety of Rwanda bill has begun. The Prime Minister's fighting for his political future as he attempts to persuade a group of rebel Tory MPs to back the Rwanda legislation ahead of a key vote. Right-wing Conservatives will meet this evening to make a final decision on whether to vote against the Safety of Rwanda bill or abstain. While Mr Cleverly also touched on the government's success on small boat crossings.
Tragically, there has been death on the Bibby Stockholm barge. I'm sure the thoughts of the whole House, like mine, are with those affected. The House will understand that at this stage I'm uncomfortable in going into any more details, but we will, of course, investigate fully. Mr Speaker, I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. Yeah. This government is stopping the boats. Arrivals are down by a third this year as illegal entries are on the rise elsewhere in Europe.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has criticised the Prime Minister's leadership in the lead-up to the vote this evening.
We've just got total Tory chaos.
Yeah.
What a fine mess this weak Prime Minister has got them all into and got the country into as well. Tearing lumps out of each other over a failing policy while they let the country down. We've had a Home Secretary sacked, an Immigration Minister resigning, and they've spent almost £300 million of taxpayers' money on Rwanda without sending a single person, and the Home Secretary seemed to confirm today that, in fact, that is £400 million.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accused the Tory party of being too self-involved to govern.
We're all stuck in their psychodrama, all being dragged down to their level. And that's what they just don't understand. While they're swanning around self-importantly with their factions and their star chambers, fighting like rats in a sack, there's a country out here that isn't being governed. A country that needs leadership.
The Home Secretary's promised the death of an asylum seeker on the Bibby Stockholm barge will be investigated fully. The first asylum seekers were brought back to the vessel, docked in Dorset in October, around 2 months after it was evacuated following the discovery of Legionella bacteria in the water supply. According to media reports, police and ambulance services arrived at the scene after the body was found this morning. Child killer Lucy Letby does not object to being stripped of her nursing credentials, the court has heard. The 2-day hearing will decide if Letby should be removed from the register. Letby filled out a form where she was asked if she accepts the Nursing and Midwifery Council's charges. She said, I accept the facts of the convictions and I maintain my innocence in all respects of all of the convictions. In August, the 33-year-old was sentenced to 14 whole life orders after she was convicted of the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murders of 6 others. Fire control staff will stage a series of strikes after Christmas in a dispute over staffing and shifts. Members of the Fire Brigades Union on Merseyside will walk out for 8 consecutive days from the 27th of December. They voted in August to take the action, opposing claims of a reduction in night staff and the introduction of a duty shift system that they say they never agreed to. And schools awaiting an Ofsted inspection can now defer the visit until after the new year, and all requests will be granted. It comes after the result of the coroner's report into the death of head teacher Ruth Perry, whose family say she took her own life when her school was downgraded from its highest rating to its lowest ever ratings over safeguarding concerns. Two school leaders' unions say simply granting inspection deferrals to schools at the end of term does not go far enough. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 2:07 and, of course, the debate rages on in Parliament over this crucial vote coming at 7 p.m. this evening.
Yes, the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has accused Rishi Sunak of hiding behind the Rwandan government. She says the Prime Minister is too weak to defend his own plan.
Meanwhile, former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick warned the House of Commons that the number of small boat arrivals in the UK will rise for many years to come unless the Rwanda plan is properly carried out. But, crucially, he didn't say he'd vote against it, not at this stage.
So why did he resign? Anyway, Sunak is trying to avert a damaging rebellion by right-wing Tory MPs over this plan ahead of the crunch vote, as his premiership hangs in the balance.
Well, our political correspondent Olivia Utley joins us from a slightly rainy Downing Street. And Olivia, does the fact that the heavens have opened, that Westminster is becoming more and more drenched, bode well? Is it an omen for tonight?
Well, it does feel a bit like pathetic fallacy. We keep getting these enormous thunderclaps over the House of Commons, which does feel a little bit like an omen of doom, if you like. It is going to be a very important night for Rishi Sunak. It looks as though the vote's going to be pretty tight. Graham Stewart, the net zero minister, is in Dubai at the moment for COP28. He's being flown back to London for the vote and then is flying straight back to Dubai again, which suggests that the whips need every single vote they can get. From what I'm hearing, it sounds as though quite a few of these rebels who Rishi Sunak's been trying to woo this morning are prepared, if not to vote for the bill, at least to abstain. But the problem for Rishi Sunak is that, yes, it's better for him if they abstain than if they vote against the bill, but it would only take 59 abstentions or 29 votes against for the Conservatives to lose. So this is a hugely important night for Rishi Sunak. In the last hour or so, there have been whispers at least that Rishi Sunak might be prepared to make a few amendments to try and get the right back on side. But it isn't clear how far those amendments would go. Richard Holden has talked about tweaks. Essentially, the problem that the right wing of the Conservative Party has with this bill is that although it would deem Rwanda a safe country generally, so the scheme could get up and running, individual migrants could still go to the courts and say that in their own personal circumstances, deportation to Rwanda would be unsafe. Now, Number 10 says that that would happen in vanishingly few situations. It says that the route to these mitigation circumstances are very narrow, that it would only apply to, for example, women in the later stages of pregnancy who are unable to fly, or those with dangerous illnesses which can't be treated in a country like Rwanda. The million-dollar question is, will those rebels believe them? Essentially, they have to trust what Rishi Sunak is saying. And it feels a little bit in Westminster today as though trust between the Conservative Party and its leader is beginning to break down. So unless Rishi Sunak can shore up their votes, it is quite possible that today could be the beginning of the end of his premiership.
Now, many of us would have assumed that Robert Jenrick, the former immigration minister who resigned over this bill, at least in part, was going to vote against the government. But it now seems to be that perhaps he will vote with the government. Is this a sign that perhaps Rishi Sunak is promising some quite crucial changes to this legislation if it passes?
Well, I think it well could be, Emily. Robert Jenrick's plan originally, I don't think was to vote against the government, it was to abstain on the bill. Right. But from what he was saying in Parliament just now, it does sound possible that he is now prepared to vote with the government. Now, I was in the lobby meeting this morning, listening to the Prime Minister's spokesman. He did say again that Rishi Sunak has gone as far as he can go with this bill. But when asked if there was any wiggle room at all, he wasn't actually prepared to say no. That's all Westminster speak. speak for, yes, the government might be willing to nudge the bill a little bit, to amend it a little bit in order to get some of those right-wing rebels on side. Could it be some sort of amendment that clarifies the exact mitigating circumstances where a migrant would be able to claim that deportation was dangerous? Could it be cracking down and explaining exactly what those situations would be to make it as narrow as possible? That's one option that's being discussed. Of course, the problem with this, as Rishi Sunak well knows, is that the One Nation Tories, those group of MPs on the left of the party, have said that they will only support the bill if it remains unamended. So on one side, you've got the right saying, amend this bill or we won't vote for it. On the left, you've got, if you do amend this bill, we won't vote for it. So it is a really sticky situation for Rishi Sunak. And one thing that's worth bearing in mind is that even if it does squeak through this evening, and as you say, that speech from Jenrick makes that look a little bit more likely than it did this morning, then Rishi Sunak is going to get in really big trouble in the House of Lords. If the bill won by a huge majority, the House of Lords, which is an unelected house, would have difficulty trying to vote it down because the elected government had shown that they were for it in an overwhelming way. However, if it only squeaks through with a handful of MPs, then the left-leaning House of Lords will feel emboldened. They could vote it down, and then we could get into a sort of ping-pong situation, which is what they call it, when a bill goes backwards and forwards from the Lords to the Commons, being amended all the time. Then the bill could end up in a completely unrecognisable way to the way that Rishi Sunak originally proposed it. And that, too, would cause long-term damage to his premiership.
Absolutely. People always forget that it's not just that one hurdle it's got to get over, and the Tories only hold 1/3 of the seats in the House of Lords. Just finally, Olivia, we heard right at the start of the debate, live on this channel, Sir Bill Cash asking the new Home Secretary James Cleverly about whether or not this bill would override international law in the eyes of the courts, and it seemed that the Home Secretary was going as far as he could to agree with Bill Cash, leaning in that direction, saying that yes, what Parliament passes should be taken as more important than any international obligation. Does that perhaps hint to any of these behind-the-scenes discussions?
Yes, I think that was a really significant intervention. You're absolutely right to raise it. James Cleverly did seem to agree with Bill Cash, that Eurosceptic right-wing MP, a member of the Star Chamber that's been looking over the legalities of this bill. And James Cleverly said that, yes, what a minister decides would be supreme over international court rulings. So he didn't go as far as to say that this bill would actually completely circumvent European laws on human rights, but he did say that what a minister said would sort of trump that, if you like. So that does show that there is a little bit of wiggle room there for the government, and it might just be enough to keep those Tory MPs from voting against the bill. But as I say, whether they vote against it, for it, or abstain is very important. The government could still lose this bill, even if no MPs vote against it, even if 59 MPs, just 59 Conservative MPs abstain, they could lose this bill anyway. So the question is, have they given in to the right enough to get it over the line?
Very interesting. Time will tell. Thank you, Olivia Utley, our political correspondent. I must say that pitter-patter on her umbrella was quite soothing, even if the subject
drama,
matter.
doesn't it?
Soothing, yeah.
It was a dark and stormy night.
It was a dark and stormy night. Shall we speak to the Executive Director of Migration Watch, Dr. Mike Jones? Mike, thank you for joining us. I'm interested to know what your organisation makes of the current drafting of this Rwanda bill. Do you think it goes far enough?
Well, there are aspects of the bill that are quite positive. I mean, it disapplies sections 2, 3 and 6 of the Human Rights Act. And obviously the Human Rights Act embeds the Convention of Human Rights, which makes it very difficult for the Home Office to deport people who have arrived illegally. So I think that's really positive. There are positive sections on the prevention of interim injunctions. But as you know, Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick point out, Clause 4 is the weakness, because that allows for individual appeals. That could create a logjam in the system. You could have a high attrition rate of appeals. And, as Jenrick points out, this could lead to a merry-go-round of legal challenges.
But Mike, other people have pointed out that if the government were to strengthen that section of the bill, it could, well, a real possibility that Rwanda then pulls out.
I'm not convinced of that. Rwanda had a very similar outsourcing policy with the State of Israel, although the details of that didn't fully come to public. So I'm not entirely convinced of this.
Looking into Section 4, as you rightly mentioned, the so-called loophole, the really relevant section, Section 4.1b, to get incredibly technical, where it talks about courts and tribunals reviewing, the wording is that this could be brought about based on compelling evidence relating specifically to the person's particular individual circumstances rather than the grounds that Rwanda is unsafe. Does that not seem like pretty tight language? No one could be refused by saying Rwanda itself is unsafe. They can't talk about the record of the Rwandan government or all of the talking points that lots of people bring up. It has to be something specific and compelling about someone individually, i.e. some sort of debilitating disease.
Yes, the wording is robust. But what works in theory doesn't necessarily work in practice. And, Professor Richard Eakins of Policy Exchange has also made this point. Rishi Sunak claims that the bar is set very high, but in practice, judges and lawyers could actually lower the bar.
What would your ideal policy be to stop the boats?
I think it's a bit too late in the day now. This is last chance saloon, but if I could go back in time, I would encourage the government to have negotiated a returns policy with the European Union during the Brexit negotiations, which didn't happen. Obviously, I think Parliament needs to look at the Human Rights Act, either to amend or abolish it, particularly the principle of non-refoulement, which I think is outdated. But again, this is all irrelevant to where we are now.
But isn't it also the point that if we were to sign some sort of returns agreement with the European Union, they would never do a returns agreement that was only one way? And one of the big problems being faced by countries, not just the United Kingdom, but countries right around the world right now, is that the number of people moving is simply skyrocketing. And all European countries are seeing a huge influx of legal and illegal migration. And by some assessment, if we had some sort of pooled obligation with the European Union, which would no doubt be asked for in returns for a returns agreement, we might have to accept even more migrants as a result of that.
Well, I would never advocate that type of returns policy. That's more in line with what the Labour Party believe in. And indeed, that's what happened under the Dublin Convention, where we actually received more people than who we sent back. An ideal returns policy is having joint boat patrols, joint operations with France. And if somebody attempts to cross the channel, they're intercepted. If they somehow manage to arrive, then obviously they should be sent back. But again, that's not going to happen. The EU has ruled out a returns policy with the UK because they need to get their own house in order.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for your time, Dr. Mike Jones, who is the Director of Migration Watch. I asked Tom about, what would the ideal policy look like for you, because this is what we've got. And I know it's hypothetical, but it's very easy to criticise, what's in front of you.
Yes.
But I do struggle sometimes because it doesn't seem to me that anyone has a perfect solution. People talk about turning the boats back, but hang on, that's hardly going to get through the courts, is it?
Well, and this is the uncomfortable situation that we as a nation face. 100 years ago, Britain ruled the waves. Britain was an unambiguous superpower. Indeed, Pax Britannica lasted from 1815 until perhaps between the First and Second World War. We're not the sole global superpower anymore. We're a global power, we're an important power, but we are less powerful than the United States or China. And in that sense, we can't just pick up people and dump them in another state. We have to have the agreement of that state to do so. So we can't just turn back the boats and dump them on France without France agreeing to that. And it doesn't seem that they're doing it. So you get this bind that the government's been in since this boat problem started in around 2018.
Yeah, and we get fixated on the small things, and it's understandably why. But you know, the accommodation or particulars around various issues like that. But it's a conundrum. Let's hope one government might be able to solve it. Coming up, we'll have the latest from the High Court as the battle over Stonehenge bypass continues. Lots of you have been in touch on that. We'll get to your views soon. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, thank you for sending in your views. We've got a huge amount on Rwanda, but also on Stonehenge, whether we need this tunnel. How many years has it been since they proposed this tunnel? Multiple years. Several years.
But the thing that makes me a little bit confused about the whole situation is currently there is a road quite close to Stonehenge. The tunnel will move traffic further away from Stonehenge. It will be further away from the monument than the current road. Surely if you're in favour of conservation, that's a good thing.
Well, Shane agrees with you. He says, why should a few rich do-gooders, many of whom don't even live in the area, with a very selfish view about Stonehenge, even have the right to challenge the tunnel? But Mike says, no, we do not want nor need any tunnel or slipways to that tunnel. Salisbury Plain is the most archaeological sensitive site so far found in the UK. Many artefacts are still being found. So there you go. He suggests that we should get this particular professor on the show, so perhaps we'll do that.
Oh, right. Well, I would have thought that a big excavation work, digging a tunnel, you'd find lots of stuff. It would be good for archaeology. I don't know, maybe...
Well, it just shows how there are very much two sides to this debate, isn't there?
Yes.
Shall we cross to the High Court? Because joining us now is GB News national reporter Theo Giacomba with more on this. Theo, can you explain exactly why these campaigners do not want this tunnel to be constructed?
Yes, well, it's a number of reasons which we've heard from campaigners today. Some of them are from London, some have come from different parts of the country, including some from Wiltshire as well. And they're saying, well, actually, this area needs to be preserved. It needs to stay exactly as it is. Now, it is a fresh challenge, Stonehenge, this road challenge. It's not the first time. They were back here in court in 2021, and they're back again today. And they say simply, we shouldn't have to keep coming back here. Now, dozens of campaigners have been here at the High Court. Some of them have gone back inside now, and others are still outside, just sheltering from the rain. And they argue that if plans go ahead, it could put the site's World Heritage status at risk, and describe the move as vandalism. Now, we've heard from National Highways, who are leading this project, and they say, we acknowledge there is a clear process for any legal challenge to take place, and that they remain confident that the scheme is the best solution for tackling long-standing bottleneck when it comes to traffic. Now, they argue that if a tunnel is put in underground near the site of Stonehenge, it could save people almost up to an hour. At the moment, they're saying people are waiting in that area, particularly at peak times, for about an hour. And if there's a tunnel, it could take people about 8 minutes just to pass through that area. However, the chair of the Stonehenge Alliance and the three directors of the SHWHS say, in the face of government indifference to the harm of the road caused by the World Heritage Site, we had no choice but to bring this legal action, and they hope that they'll be successful in overturning this. Now, the hearing, it's only the first day, and it's due to last for 3 days.
Well, Theo, thank you so much for that update, and I'm really fascinated to see what the outcome of this is. It's, of course, not the first time this has been challenged, but hopefully it'll be the last.
Well, you think we should just be able to build anything anywhere?
Within reason.
Yeah, so, and the sphere.
Well, no, I think, to be honest, to make my position clear, I think everything should be decided far more quickly than it is now.
I can agree
and whether
with
you're
that.
pro or against this particular development, the fact it's taken years and years and years to even make a decision has cost loads of money, weakened our economy, and annoyed everyone in the process.
Yes, I mean, just look at HS2. Anyway, coming up, should COVID restrictions be reintroduced? Why on earth are we asking this? Well, a new poll says 1/5 of the British public would support them coming back. And that includes younger people too. We'll discuss that after your headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you very much. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Robert Jenrick says he wants the Rwanda bill to work, adding it's critical to get it up and running. The former immigration minister, who resigned over the legislation, supported the bill during a debate in the House of Commons. Home Secretary James Cleverly argued Parliament and the British people support the Rwanda plan. A Home Office statement ahead of the crunch vote tonight revealed LGBT people may face some discrimination in Rwanda, though they should be safe there. Right-wing Conservatives will meet this evening to make that final decision on whether to vote against the Safety of Rwanda bill or to abstain. Mr Cleverly also touched on the government's success on small boat crossings.
Tragically, there has been death on the Bibby Stockholm barge. I'm sure the thoughts of the whole House, like mine, are with those affected. The House will understand that at this stage I'm uncomfortable in going into any more details, but we will, of course, investigate fully. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. Yeah. This government is stopping the boats. Arrivals are down by a third this year as illegal entries are on the rise elsewhere in Europe.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has criticised the Prime Minister's leadership in the lead-up to the vote this evening.
We've just got total Tory chaos. What a fine mess this weak Prime Minister has got them all into and got the country into as well. Tearing lumps out of each other over a failing policy while they let the country down. We've had a Home Secretary sacked, an Immigration Minister resigning, and they've spent almost £300 million of taxpayers' money on Rwanda without sending a single person, and the Home Secretary seemed to confirm today that, in fact, that is £400 million.
The Home Secretary's promise the death of the asylum seeker on the Bibby Stockholm barge will be investigated fully. The first asylum seekers were brought back to the vessel, docked in Dorset in October, around 2 months after it was evacuated, following the discovery of Legionella bacteria in the water supply. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Thanks, Tatiana. Now, an emergency budget meeting has taken place in Birmingham. The City Council is setting out a credible plan for addressing a £300 million budget gap over the next 2 years.
Well, rises in council tax, selling off council-owned assets and redundancies are all under consideration to tackle the extremely serious and challenging situation.
So, joining us now with the details is our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson. A £300 million financial black hole. What's the latest?
Yeah, well, that £300 million it comes as an increase from the £177 million that it was reported it was facing over 2 years, as reported in November. This all comes, and these figures all come from the financial reports that, since the bankruptcy was declared in September, have been released every month, giving us those updates on the serious state and condition of Birmingham City Council's finances. So this latest report, which was agreed to, and its recommendations agreed to today in that meeting by the council, sets out what essentially they've been able to achieve so far. So for 2024-2025, that year, it was reported that they need to find around £165 million worth of savings. They've so far managed, they say, to find £150 million worth. £72.8 million of those savings come in services reductions. Now, there's no key indicator of what services exactly those cuts are going to be part of. So there is some ambiguity and certainly some anxiety felt by the residents here, as they don't really know what services are particularly going to be cut. But the recommendations within the report that have been agreed to by that cabinet meeting today at the council also say that they should write to the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities requesting that they can increase their council tax level next year, in next year's budget, above the maximum rise that you're allowed as a local authority of 4.99%. Now, across the country, as we've seen other councils go bankrupt, they have in some cases risen council tax by 10 or even 15%. That, of course, directly hits the pockets of the residents of this city. But they've also agreed to ask permission from the Department for Levelling Up and the Secretary of State, of course, Michael Gove, for permission for capitalisation direction. That essentially means permission to start selling off their assets and also borrow money in order to, of course, not only cover off the deficit of £87 million that they've had over this last year, but also, of course, that £800 million deficit in equal pay liability. Now, Councillor Robert Oldham is the leader of the opposition here at the council. He gave his reaction to that cabinet meeting to me a little bit earlier on.
But the Labour administration here in Birmingham has had to admit the unprecedented situation it's got itself into. We've got negative reserves here in Birmingham of minus £678 million. Labour are looking to make £300 million worth of savings over the next 2 years from the budget. And today they've admitted they're going to look to set a deficit budget next year. That means they're going to look to capitalise the expenditure from next year's budget instead of making savings to balance the budget. To put it into context, how you might think about it at home, it's like taking out a loan to pay off your mortgage. This is not a way to sustainably run a business.
Yeah, so Councillor John Cotton, who's the leader of Birmingham City Council, said that this council and his cabinet are focused on the job at hand. They say that they are trying to be transparent and take into consideration the wishes of Birmingham residents along this whole process. And part of that process, including what assets they're going to sell off, will be done by a committee and a cabinet chaired by him specifically just for looking at what properties the city owns what they might well sell off. So still a lot of decisions to be made here in the city and at the council.
Goodness me, what a mess. What mismanagement. Well, Jack Carson, thank you so much for bringing us the very latest.
They're not alone either, are they?
They're not.
We've got Nottingham City Council as well, looking to cut services because of their financial strain, but there you go. After the break, we'll be joined by our panel to look ahead to the crucial vote happening this evening. Don't go anywhere.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 2:41, and there is currently the most extraordinary debate in the House of Commons, all leading up to a crucial vote at 7 p.m. this evening on the totemic piece of legislation before the House, the Safety of Rwanda Bill. Well, here's some live pictures from the Commons now. But to discuss it, we're joined by the broadcaster and historian David Oldroyd-Bolt and the former Labour MP Bill Rammell.
OK, there's been a bit of a will he, won't he bill about Robert Jenrick. Will he vote against this bill? Of course, he did resign over it, and the huge legal migration figures as well. That was part of the reason in his letter. If Robert Jenrick does vote against the government on this, do you think a lot of MPs might go with him?
I mean, who knows? And who knows about Robert Jenrick? You know, he's been on a journey. He was originally put in the Home Office to sit on Suella Braverman, and he's now coming out as a hard-right apostle of harsher immigration controls, particularly with regard to Rwanda. I'm not sure which way he's going to go. If you asked for my gut instinct now, listening, reading the runes, I think the government will win with not too huge a rebellion in terms of numbers voting against.
And David, it all comes down to these promises or otherwise in what happens in the committee stage of the bill's passage through Parliament. I suppose a number of MPs still haven't made their mind up as to whether vote against, abstain, there's another option, or vote for with the hope it gets changed later.
Yes. For Mr Jenrick, I think this is a rather strategic thing. He's trying to set himself up as being a hardliner so that when he makes a leadership bid later on, he can say, look, I was right there. As to the alteration of the bill in committee, I think Olivia Utley mentioned earlier that a lot depends on the Lords. I think there's going to be a huge amount of opposition there to this bill. So any amendment that the Commons makes, it could just go back and forth and back and forth. I mean, whether it comes to Parliament acting, it would be an extraordinary thing to do.
And the Parliament Act, of course, would override the Lords, but only after a year. So there wouldn't be enough time left in this Parliament.
You could just about squeeze it through if it was at the very last minute.
In January 2025.
Yeah. But, I mean, that would be an extraordinary thing to do on an extraordinarily weak bill, so I don't think that they'd waste the time on it. I think eventually it will just be tin-canned.
You're not the first person to have suggested that Robert Jenrick might be on manoeuvres, and that's why he's taking this stance on this bill.
Is it necessarily a weak bill, though? It's got a notwithstanding clause that knocks out the Human Rights Act. That seems like a pretty profound thing for the government to do.
Even if it's successful in its own terms, it's going to be a handful of people who are sent to Rwanda. That is not a deterrent for the tens of thousands of people who are coming halfway across the globe to try and come here illegally.
I think that's entirely the point. It will be a drop in the ocean.
Well, goodness me, before we have too much agreement on our panel, shall we move on to another big story? We've been teasing this one a little bit through the day because some extraordinary polling has come about from More in Common, the research organisation, which has found that a surprising number of Brits want to bring back COVID restrictions.
Yes, although the caveat is if the country's health situation demanded it. But still, a fifth of the British public would support COVID restrictions being reintroduced. Clearly, we haven't been that traumatised then, Bill.
Well, I mean, if you look at the poll, it's a bit theoretical. It says, if there was a future pandemic, would you favour the return of restrictions? And even then, amongst all age groups, it's a majority saying, no, we wouldn't favour the return of restrictions. I think if push came to shove and we did experience another COVID, then I think most people would accept a return of restrictions. But
well, if it was made illegal to go outside of your home at specific situations, then yes, I guess they would have to accept them. But do you genuinely think that people would be willing to lock down again?
I think they would, but heavily caveated. I think there'd be a much more deterministic approach, saying that, for example, completely shutting schools on any cost-benefit analysis is really not worth it. I think for certain key businesses, there'd be a push to keep them open. But I think the other interesting thing within the research is, and you're absolutely right, there is that bias towards its millennials who are saying that they want the return of restrictions. And bluntly, I see that all the time in terms of the attitudes of young people, in terms of going to work, being in the workplace on a regular basis. I really don't think it's good for young people in terms of their mental health, in terms of their future career aspirations, to be constantly working from home.
And also to meet you know, a partner.
Yeah.
How are young people going to meet someone to settle down with if they so wish, if they're always at home? But David, why do you think it's that younger group, that millennial group, 25 to 42, who are the most likely to want restrictions back?
Bluntly, because they're far less imbued with the spirit of liberty than older generations. I think it was absolutely obvious during the pandemic. Every bit of polling showed that the younger people were much more likely to support maintenance and extension of restrictions. They don't have the same thirst for freedom and liberty and the same intrinsic knowledge that this is the necessary and obvious part of life that we must cherish above all.
Do you think it's because they think it's the nice thing to say or do?
I think there is an aspect of that, but also I just think quite genuinely the political culture of younger generations is much less concerned with freedom.
Do you think it is that different? Because I did see some polling during COVID that showed that it was university students that were the least in favour of restrictions.
Well, university students, but yes, but these are 25 to 40 year olds.
Interesting distinction there, but also, of course, we did see supermajorities in favour of all the restrictions when it came. I suppose this is all theoretical. When you actually see on your television screens hospitals overflowing in northern Italy, that changes minds and people perhaps revisit what their view might be.
Well, particularly if that's being pushed by the government as an extremist point of view. I quite simply hope that if ever this
extremist point of view to actually protect people's lives.
People don't need their lives protecting. They were already making their own decisions before lockdowns came in to do that for themselves. And I hope that if ever we do suffer another pandemic of the sort we had before, the British people would not allow themselves to have their liberties curtailed as they did for 2 years.
I think if we hadn't had the degree of restrictions that we did, many tens of thousands more people would have died. Well, now, you might say, so what?
Is not supported by any data from anywhere around the world where they did not do what we did. So you may think it's not supported by data.
If you're quoting, for example, Sweden's position and its practice has been very mischaracterised. There were a lot of effective restrictions in place.
Well, I'm also thinking of Florida and Wyoming and Nebraska and places where they did not have...
have higher death rates than comparable. So Sweden, whilst it had lower death rates than the UK, higher than Norway, higher than Denmark, higher than Finland. It might be legitimate to argue that is a price that we pay for liberty, but I think it is hard to argue against the idea that if you stop people mixing, you get less transmission of viruses.
But I come down to the simple point. It should be something that people decide for themselves and that families decide for themselves. You should not ever have seen a situation where dying people were separated from their families at the moment of death. It was inhumane and unforgivable.
There was a huge amount
it wasn't unforgivable. That's an absolute...
It is entirely unforgivable.
It's an absolutist position. You know,
yes, it is, because it is
we
entirely
insist, for example, that people wear seatbelts in their cars. We insist they drive on the left-hand side of the road. There are certain things, and particularly in a health crisis...
Are you comparing the inhumanity of separating people from their families at the point of death to wearing a seatbelt in a car? Because that is an absurd comparison.
No, I'm saying that there are all sorts of restrictions that are put in place. And if you live in a civilised society, you have to have rules and you have to have balance. I think there were downsides to the degree of lockdown we had, but the absolutist position that you just articulated, that there should be no restrictions and people should decide for themselves, I think is dangerous folly.
Right, well, I want to get both of your views on what the Cabinet Office Minister John Glenn has said about the civil service. He says the civil service needs more geographic diversity, and so jobs should be moved out of London faster. So suggested hubs in Aberdeen, Darlington, Greater Manchester. Should more civil servants be moved, Bill, to other areas of the country?
Well, they always have been. You know, when I was a minister, I travelled regularly to Sheffield and Darlington, where we had a significant number of civil servants. But there are limits. You know, London is one of the top 5 global cities, and there are reasons that organisations, all sorts of organisations, including government, base their staff here. And, you know, when it comes to senior civil servants, and this would impact upon them, they have to be in London because Westminster, the House of Commons, is and the House of Lords is in London, and they need interaction with government ministers. So, you know, I think you need balance, but the idea that you can just flood the country with civil servants is an unrealistic proposition.
David, I suppose we can't really uninvent the concept of a capital city. There is utility to having certain decision makers in one place.
Yeah, there is. I know that one of the proposals is to move the Department of Energy and Net Zero out to Aberdeen, just keep the Net Zero bit going and going and going until they get to the Outer Hebrides and then cut off the electricity and leave them there so that they can't damage the country anymore. As to the senior civil servants being in London, that is obvious. But the idea that we're somehow going to improve the economies of deprived parts of the country by increasing public sector work, when that is the strategy that Gordon Brown and Tony Blair followed for 13 years, that the Tories have followed for another 13 years, and that has meant that actually you've seen a great rise in public sector employment without the concomitant rise in private sector to pay for it.
So, David, the goal is moving 22,000 jobs out of London. That's been brought forward from 2030 to 2027. You'd say just scrap those 22,000 jobs.
Yes, encourage private sector employment, get some entrepreneurialism going in deprived areas so that we actually grow as a nation rather than stagnating as we have for a quarter of a century.
But the policy is underpinned by this crude notion of a north-south divide. I was watching Question Time on another channel last week, and it was based in Doncaster, and there was a guy in the audience going through the rehearsal of all the problems that Doncaster had in terms of cuts in government funding, lack of investment, lack of highway shops being opened. And I thought, you could have been talking about my former constituency of Harlow in Essex in the southeast. So the idea that we've got this crude north-south divide, I think, is wrong. And the idea that you're going to solve the problem by just moving civil servants out of London is unrealistic and is not desirable.
And particularly when it comes to deprivation, you find pockets of deprivation, and more than just pockets, across the entire country. It's certainly not a north-south thing.
Yes, particularly coastal areas, for instance. We know and have known for many decades that one of the most deprived parts of the country is the coastal strip going around from the south up the east coast up Scotland. So how about addressing that sort of thing? I agree with Bill that there is no north-south divide. It's about the gap between those prosperous towns where there are lots of opportunities for jobs, particularly in the private sector, and those parts of the country where those industries do not exist.
And frankly, to some extent, there's a population thing. You know, London is a global city of 10 million people. Not a single city anywhere else in the UK comes close. Perhaps if we let, you know, Manchester, Liverpool, if we built that connecting Charles line, I think they want to call it, east-west, and make that one economic area, that could be a counterbalance. But it seems like you don't have the same economies.
I mean, look at Germany. You have so many different areas where there's booming industries.
We should have another city of 10 million people.
Yes, OK. I think we're going to take a quick look at the House of Commons, where the debate is still raging on. No, we're not. That is the end of the show. Thank you very much for joining us on Good Afternoon Britain. And thank you to you, Bill Rammell and David Oldroyd Bolt. Yes, thank you very much. I got your name correct there. Thank you very much. It's been a fantastic show.
It has. And don't forget to stick around with us on GB News right up until 7 p.m. today, when this crucial crunch vote will be coming to a conclusion. Don't go anywhere.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Drier and clearer weather will move into northwestern areas, bringing a frosty start to Wednesday for some of us, but it's going to stay drizzly and quite dull across eastern areas. That's as this area of low pressure that's brought an unsettled day today pushes into the east, where it will linger through much of the day. That will mean that we've got continued heavy rain across eastern areas through the course of this evening. There's still a rain warning in force for that across parts of northeastern England and eastern Scotland. Ahead of that rain, though, across the southeast, we'll see quite a lot of cloud develop overnight, so quite a murky night here. A different story, though, further north and west, where we'll see clear spells allowing a frost and potentially some icy patches by tomorrow morning. And then that clearer, drier weather becomes slightly more widespread through the course of Wednesday, spreading into parts of northern England, as well as Wales and the southwest of England as well. Further east, though, it stays cloudy with drizzly rain through much of the day, so quite a dull and damp day, with drizzly rain developing in the southeast by the end of the day and feeling fairly cool as well. In the northwest, though, it will feel fairly pleasant in sunshine despite the colder start to the day. A chilly start in the southeast on Thursday morning, but it will soon cloud over as the next area of rain arrives. However, the heaviest rain will be much more limited, as that is because high pressure is starting to build in for Friday and into the weekend as well. So that means we'll see more in the way of dry weather, and temperatures will rise by day and by night. See you later.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese.